Ah, there we go. Okay. Might help if I add myself to the stream, wouldn't it? Okay. Oh, camera's a little fuzzy. Let's fix that. All right. How are we looking? Wait. Ah, there we go. Okay, excellent. Excellent. Alrighty, for those just joining us, welcome once again. We are here reading the second cold read for Alaskan Fire. For those just joining us, we just met our friendly neighborhood werverine, Jack, and we're going to get into more of his case of perpetual foot and mouth disease today, aren't we? So, let's have ourselves a look here. There it is. Chapter 3 is On the Lam. Hello, Miss Nix. Welcome. Welcome. Let me just send this link to the author real quick, because we are now here. Good to have you. So, today I'll be doing a few more of these. I'm planning on another one on Tuesday, Thursday next week as well. And we'll just be cranking on this. And then, just get this thing as read as we can. Get this out to all of you. For those who don't know, these cold reads, after I submit the audio to the good folks at Sound Booth Theater, they do actually go live on the app. So you can download them there if you want to hear all of my performance, and I do mean all of it, including everything that I screw up and all of the ensuing screw-up related hijinks. Then just check out the Sound Booth Theater app, and you can find the cold reads there. They usually take a couple of weeks from the time that I submit them to the time that they come out, because obviously it's a lot to edit. But if you ever want to hear all of the, as Jeff Hayes would say, warts and all, in all of their warty glory, then that would be the place to go if you want to take another listen. Or you could watch me do it here on the YouTube channel. Anyway, I believe we are just about ready to get started. So, here we go. Let me just make sure we are recording, because that would help. That would suck if I wasn't recording this. That's something. That'd be a thing to catch. Alright, I believe we are all ready to go. Let's just get the old Stream Deck set to Ableton mode. Okay. So we're Blaze Jack and Werverine Jack. Here we are. In 3, 2, now I'm nervous I'm not streaming. Let me check again. Excellent, good, okay. In 3, 2, 1. Now 1. Chapter 3, On the Lam. Blaze made it a good mile straight through the woods, staying well off the trails, getting as far away from the sleeping lady and her attacker as possible before she stopped, panting, and pulled out her cell phone. Except her cell phone, she discovered, with growing horror, had been tucked inside the front pocket of the soggy wet shirt that now lay on the floor in her abandoned bedroom, conveniently protected from accidental submersion by a handy little $150 case. I am so totally dead, Blaze thought, staring at the woods around her in horror. It being early May, the snow had mostly melted and there were buds on the trees, but there wasn't even grass yet. Temperatures still had the nasty habit of dropping below freezing at night, and she hadn't even brought a coat. Or, gee, a pack of matches and a cooler of hot dogs. She was on the run, stumbling is the word, Zach. Our first mistake of the evening. Yes, okay. Okay, good. And here we go. She was on the run, stumbling through God knew where in the first week of May, and she didn't even have a way to build a fire. Hell, she wasn't even entirely sure exactly which direction she was headed in. Once she'd been walking long enough, all the fallen birch trees, the scraggly white spruce, the twisted willow, the alder thickets, and the towering cottonwoods looked the same. Damn it, Blaze thought, briefly considering backtracking to retrieve her phone, but deciding that she would simply tough it out instead, and hope she made her way to a river or some other waterway that she could follow to its confluence with something bigger. People, she knew, congregated on flowing water. The more water, the more people. She had stumbled through the woods for at least 4 or 5 hours before Blaze happened into a small clearing, seemingly in the middle of nowhere. A squat little cabin sat in its middle, and beyond, she could see the open area of a lakeside. Thinking maybe she had taken some crazy and convoluted path back to Lake Ebony, Blaze stumbled out into the clearing and down towards the lake. Looking over the shallow, mud-bottomed lake, however, it was pretty obvious to Blaze that she'd found one of the thousands of other lakes, ponds, and swamps dotting the wilderness in all directions from the Sleeping Lady. Tentatively, oh man, I ran out of breath on that. Larger breath next time, Zach. Here we go. All right. Let's do that. Mud-bottomed lake, however, okay. Down towards the lake, down towards the lake. Ah, here we are. Okay. Looking over the shallow, mud-bottomed lake, however, it was pretty obvious to Blaze that she'd found one of the thousands of other lakes, ponds, and swamps dotting the wilderness in all directions from the Sleeping Lady. Tentatively, knowing that she probably wasn't going to find a better place to spend the night, Blaze went up the steps of the quiet little cabin and knocked on the door. When no grungy old fart with a 6-foot beard yanked the door open and shoved a shotgun up her nostril, she gently twisted the knob and pushed the door inward. "Hello?" she called softly. No answer. Of course not. Most of the cabins in the area were recreational quarters for wealthy doctors, lawyers, and businessmen in the lower 48, only used during a couple weeks for fishing in king season, then again when the silvers were running. Sometimes the real die-hard outdoorsmen came out in late fall to fish the streams for trout and Dolly Varden, and a few went canoeing through all the lakes, looking for that 50-inch pike. Somehow, however, by the abandoned look of the dilapidated structure, she doubted it had seen an occupant in at least a couple years. She stepped inside and shut the door. The place smelled of mosquito coils and wood smoke, and she was pretty sure that whoever owned the building had a penchant for tobacco. She was also pretty sure he hadn't visited in something nearing a decade. A quick inspection of the dusty interior told her that the cabin had no phone, which wasn't very surprising, considering that it was mostly only the lodges and full-time residents who could afford the cost, upkeep, and long-term maintenance of a full-fledged satellite phone system. The only thing the little cabin did have, she discovered, was a pretty complicated radio. The cabin's owner, it appeared, liked his music. After discovering the pantry and its meager supply of expired canned goods, Blaze slumped into the main couch with a can of tuna, and after cracking the lid with the temperamental old-school can opener that she had found hanging from a nail nearby, ate fish from the can with her fingers, reveling in how wonderful it tasted after such a long, chilly hike through the woods. Can demolished, she sat there trying to figure out what to do next. She had a thing occupying her lodge, convinced it was a werewolf, or a werverine, or something. Something really big and ugly with lots of teeth. God, she needed the authorities. That and about 6 different guns, each with 1,000 rounds of ammunition. That and about 6 different guns each with 1,000... Oh, didn't like the way I said that. That and about 6 different guns, each with 1,000 rounds of ammunition, all strapped to her chest in her best impression of Rambo. Let the little twit fuck with her then. Blaze leaned back, feeling the first warm tingles of exhaustion dragging at her chest. It was hard to walk through the woods, like trying to keep your balance on an ever-changing, never-level earthquake reproduction machine with built-in tripping mechanisms. God, she was tired. Until now, she'd never really liked tuna. But as it had been the only choice aside from canned Great Northern beans and baby onions, the little pack of fish had tasted better than anything she'd ever eaten before. Blaze knew that was probably just the exhaustion speaking, but at the moment, she was too tired to critique culinary merit in the middle of the damn woods, on the lam from a guy who thought he was a medieval monster, born again to terrorize some really tall chick on her own property in the wilderness. I really have to find a way back to town, Blaze thought as she started drifting off. She had seen other cabins from the lakeside when she had gone down to figure out where she was. Oh, my voice cracked. Don't do that voice. Don't crack on me. She had seen other cabins from the lakeside when she had gone down to figure out where she was. Tomorrow she would spend the day circling the lake, hoping to find a permanent resident with a telephone. Blaze had only been asleep an hour, maybe an hour and a half, before the door slammed inward, embedding itself in the little stove that marked the beginning of the cabin's tiny kitchenette. Blaze screamed and tried to scramble to her feet. "All right!" the fanged, taloned, drooling monster in the doorway roared. "Since you seem to be intent on doing things the hard way, wench, I'm thinking I should just bury you in the damn hill and be done with it." He stepped inside and slammed the door behind him, making the windows rattle in their frames, trapping Blaze in the tiny room with the werverine. Blaze cried out and backed up until her spine was pressed up against the back wall. Growling, the werverine strode towards her and yanked a chair off the middle of the floor, dragged it back until it was positioned directly in front of the only exit, and sat down hard enough to make the wood squeak. "You?" the werverine growled at her, pointing a taloned hand at the window over the lake. "Almost made it off my territory, you long-legged pain in the ass." As he spoke, his form shifted back to something more human, until the only bit of monster showing was the way his canines extended past his lips in a snarl. "Do you know what would have happened to you if the fawns caught you on their land?" "Accost me, tie me up, fling me over their shoulder, lick me, and try to convince me not to tell the police?" Blaze snapped. He gave her a flat green stare. "They would have eaten you." Her mouth formed a little O as she tried to think of some way he could be joking. "Probably with mushrooms and wine sauce," he added. "The creepy bastards are all about fungi." "I'm in a stranger's cabin, having a chat about fairy tale culinary preferences with a man who's claiming to be a werverine," Blaze thought. "So?" Jack growled. "You use the CB?" "The what?" Blaze demanded. "The CB. The radio?" He gestured at the black monstrosity taking up an honored spot beside the wood stove. Blaze just stared at him. "Why would I use the radio?" Jack narrowed his pretty green eyes at her. "You're trying to tell me that you just spent 5 hours running from me through the woods, that you didn't even try to use the CB. This has to be some sort of nightmare," Blaze thought. "I wasn't really in the mood for music, thank you." Wait, that's not a grit. I'm gonna start that over. I think I missed something on the text, too. Okay. Start from there. Okay. "You're trying to tell me you just spent 5 hours running from me through the woods, but you didn't even try to use the CB. This has to be some sort of nightmare," Blaze thought. "I wasn't really in the mood for music, thank you," Blaze gritted, showing teeth. "Getting kidnapped kind of put me out of the mood. Now if you would just get out of my head and let me wake up, I'd be much obliged." He cocked his head at her, making his black curls twitch against his scalp. "I can't fucking believe this. You still don't believe me, do you?" Blaze gave the werverine a long glare. "All right," she gritted finally, when he didn't vanish in a puff of mental exhaust. "Let's say your argument has some merit. What now?" "That's what I was going to ask you," the man bristled. "You're the one who seemed to be getting butthurt about the whole thing." Blaze considered repeating the fact that he had kidnapped and assaulted her, but then decided not to waste her breath on a creature that obviously had less mental acuity than a vole. "You," she said carefully, "have obviously got some misconceptions about me, and thanks to you, I now have some less than welcome revelations about you." She took a deep breath, using all of her tact in an attempt to punch through this man's thick skull. "It seems to me that we need to come to an understanding before one of us gets hurt." Jack laughed. "Let's hear it, Toots. You're fired, for one." He raised a brow. "Who said I was letting you fire me?" "Letting you?" Blaze stammered, shocked. "Look, you cretin. Just because you're starving, I don't have any obligation to pay you for trying to eat me." "I already told you," Jack growled. "If I'd tried to eat you, I'd be shitting a really big Yeti turd right now instead of sprawled over a chair listening to her bitch." Blaze's mouth dropped open. She stared at him in silence for a long, horrible minute, then glanced at the nearest window, wondering if she could wriggle through it and make it to the lake before the werewolf caught her. Immediately, Jack lazily unwound himself from the chair and got to his feet. "All right, girlie. Seeing as how you're still not going to be reasonable, I'm just going to take your ass back home and give you a couple days to think about it." Blaze hastily backed away from him, stumbling into the far corner of the cabin, wrapping her head on an iron frying pan that had Blaze hastily backed away from him, stumbling into the far corner of the cabin, wrapping her head on an iron frying pan that had obviously been hung there out of head reach by the previous occupant. Immediately, she yanked it off the wall and held it up between them. "Back off," she growled, swinging it back and forth. "I will bash your brains all over the goddamn walls, I swear it!" Jack's eyes darkened. "Put that down." Blaze gave him her best impression of a confident laugh. "Not a chance, Buster. I know 6 different forms of judo, and I could kick your teeth out through the back of your skull with just my big toe." He crossed his huge arms over his burly chest. "That's so." "Uh-huh," Blaze said, grinning in her best impression of a crazy martial artist on the edge. "Just try me, asshole." "You know judo, huh?" he said, eyeing her dubiously. "Sure do," Blaze growled. "Been doing it since I was old enough to walk. 8 different black belts." "8, huh?" Jack said. "Just a minute ago it was 6. Blaze said, scrambling for an excuse, her face flushing. "I double majored." A grin actually twitched the corner of the bastard's mouth. "Double majored, huh?" He gestured at the frying pan. "And what's that, a form of kendo?" Blaze didn't have the first idea what kendo was, but she went with it. "Sure as fuck is, asshole. Now back the hell off before I kendo your skull into the next lifetime." Jack sighed and stepped forward, completely indifferent to the iron skillet. Gasping in panic, Blaze put as much upper body strength into her swing as she could, aiming for his left ear. Jack reached up and caught the handle of the skillet with one hand, without even looking, and held it there as if there were a cement statue suddenly fused to the frying pan. "Kendo," Jack said as he stood there, only an arm's length from her, looking up into her eyes, "is a relic from the time of the shoguns, and is based off of the kenjutsu of the samurai, a form with which I am intimately familiar. It means way of the sword, not—" He twisted the skillet suddenly, making her lose her grip in a spasm of pain. "Way of the frying pan." He blithely dropped the pan at his feet, looking utterly unconcerned that she might bend and retrieve it. For a long moment they stood like that, with Jack much too close and Blaze backed up against the wall, her heart a pounding inferno in her chest. "So," Jack said as he peered up at her, "I think, maybe, we got off to the wrong start." When Blaze glanced down at the frying pan, she saw divots in the handle where he'd held it. Fingerprints in the cast iron. Realizing then that the man in front of her could simply reach out, take her face in his big hand, and squeeze her brains out through her eye sockets, Blaze swallowed and lifted her chin, fighting down sheer animal terror. "I'd say," she managed. "You're probably right." Jack grunted and held out his skillet-crushing palm. "My name is Jack Thornton. I'll be working for you as your mechanic while you're running the sleeping lady." Blaze swallowed, fighting a sudden, gut-wrenching terror that her hand was about to become a crunched, fleshy puree in the man's calloused fist. She didn't want to be within the same room as that hand, much less put her palm in it. If she could have backed further into the wall, she would have, her heart ratcheting up to minor white-hot explosions in her ribcage. Jack seemed to sense her reason for hesitation. "I already told you, Miss Blaze," he said, his green eyes softening. "I'm not gonna hurt you. Now fucking shake my hand and introduce yourself, or I just throw you back over my shoulder and dispense with the bullshit." The gentle way he said it, Blaze realized that. The gentle way he said it, Blaze realized that was this man's version of compassion. Biting her lip against the sickening dread in her stomach, Blaze squeezed her eyes shut and tentatively reached out until her fingers made contact with something warm. Jack's hand suddenly engulfed hers, and he held it gently, waiting. "I'm Blaze," she whispered, cringing as far into the wall as she could get. She'd never been so scared in her life. Half of her wanted to dribble to the floor in terror, and the other half wanted to just puke all over him and pee down her leg. "All right, Miss Blaze," Jack said, still lightly yet firmly holding her palm in his. "I'm a good guy. No, it don't look like it when I change, but I really am. I don't hurt people if I can get away with it. I'm pretty much like every other guy you ever met. I like to drink beer and tinker with shit till it runs good. We clear so far?" "Crystal," Blaze managed through the knot of fear in her throat. "Okay," Jack grunted. He was still holding her hand, encasing it in a fist the size of a grizzly bear's paw. "We can help each other. Our goals are basically the same. You want to get a lodge up and running, and I want to earn enough so I can buy steaks regular. You get me?" Blaze flinched at the mention of steaks, but seeing how he wasn't releasing her hand, and the cabin wall wasn't yielding at her advances, she could only swallow. "So, tell me about yourself," Jack continued. "What are your goals for the sleeping lady? And open your damn eyes, woman," he snapped. "Am I hurting you?" Every part of her trembling, Blaze forced her eyes back open. Jack peered up at her a moment before he grunted, "Okay, Toots. Let's hear it. What made you run out into the bush and land in this old Werverine's backyard?" "Why are you still holding my hand?" Blaze whispered. "'Cause I'm trying to prove a damn point," he said gruffly. Blaze glanced down, saw her hand where it disappeared into his, realized just how easy it would be for him to break it off at the wrist and toss it through the window, and looked back into his eyes nervously. "You getting the picture yet, sweetie?" he asked softly. She bit her lip and swallowed, her heart thundering against her ribcage, every part of her wanting to squirm backwards through the rough boards of the cabin wall to get away from him. But between him and the wall, she was unable to move. "I think so," she managed. "Okay," Jack said. "Talk to me. Where you from? What you doing? Why'd you pick my neck of the woods?" It took all of her control to manage. "I'm from Anchorage, trying to build a fishing lodge. And because it was cheap." There was kindness in the man's face when he said, "600 large ain't really all that cheap." "It's what I could afford," Blaze said. "Most lodges are $1 million and up." "So, what?" Jack said, still keeping her palm wrapped in his warm, calloused grip. "You just want to get it back up and running as a fishing lodge?" Blaze swallowed nervously. No. His gaze sharpened. No. I wanted to farm, Blaze squeaked, suddenly seeing fingers flying across the room when the hammer that was his grip came down on the anvil that was his palm. She tugged back slightly, but there was absolutely no give in his arm, and she had to swallow down her terror or simply devolve into a whimpering puddle on the floor. Babbling now, she added, "But I don't need one if it bothers you, really, I don't." "A farm is a lot of work," Jack offered. "Especially around here." There was no derision, no disgust, no humiliating disdain. Just a statement of fact and curiosity? Blaze held her breath, then tentatively said, "I did a lot of research." "Yeah?" Jack asked. He shifted his stance idly, which moved her hand ever so slightly away from her. Immediately, Blaze had to fight down the insane fear that she was about to lose her entire arm, not just a few digits. "What kind of research?" Jack urged softly when she didn't respond. "How long are you going to hold my hand?" Blaze managed, eyes riveted to their joint grip. "Till the damn conversation is over," Jack barked. "Like I said, trying to prove a damn point. Probably falling flat on my face, judging by the way you keep acting like I'm going to rip your arm off. But I'm trying." "Sorry," Blaze managed, biting her lip. "You're scaring the crap out of me." Jack groaned and slapped his other hand over his forehead and dragged it down his face. Peering at her from between his fingers, he said, "You're missing the point." "Sorry," Blaze babbled, cringing. "Don't apologize, damn it," Jack growled. "Listen, see this? See how I'm not breaking your arm, or twisting off fingers, or anything like that? I'm doing my damnedest to calm you down, okay? I feel somewhat guilty for being a shit earlier, and I'm trying to remedy this whole situation by showing you I'm not the boogeyman. That said," he gave her a flat stare, "I'm not letting go of your hand until you've convinced me you're okay with having a werewolf as a neighbor. Whether that takes the next couple minutes or the next 3 days, I won't be leaving you alone again until you do." "He's serious," Blaze thought, instinctively trying to inch away. Jack held her easily in place. With his other hand, he gestured at the woods in general. "Tell me what kind of research. I know a bit about farming myself. You talking pigs and chickens, or you talking fields of potatoes, or just a greenhouse, or what?" Blaze actually felt a flutter of excitement at the question. "All of it," she managed. He raised a heavy black brow. "All of it?" No contempt, just curiosity. The lack of mockery in his voice, something that Blaze had dealt with from the very first day sitting in her father's lawyer's office when the stuffy old prick had scoffed at her casual mention of how she could start a farm out in the bush, gave her the courage to continue. "I want to raise heritage animals," she said slowly. "Rare livestock. Stuff that our grandparents used to raise." He snorted. "I doubt that's possible, but keep going. Why rare stuff?" "'Cause the older breeds are more independent," Blaze said. "They haven't had their survival skills bred out of them. They don't wander out and die in a blizzard because they're That wasn't a bad run without a mistake. Alright, let's see what we can do here. "I'll check in with you all on the quarter hour." "They don't wander out and die in a blizzard because they're too stupid to step inside the barn that's 20 feet away." "And the plants?" Jack asked. "Non-GMO stuff," Blaze said immediately. Then, before he could ask, she said, "GMO, it means genetically modified organism. Something that somebody grew in a test tube by tinkering with its genetic code. Animals that glow in the dark. Plants that have been given the genes to produce their own insecticides." Jack's eyes widened a bit. "They're doing that?" She nodded. "GMOs represent about 90% of all corn, soybean, and cotton grown in the U.S. It's such a huge part of our food supply that just about everyone in America has it on their shelves and doesn't even know it." He squinted and wrinkled his nose. That's Not good. No, Blaze said, getting excited now. And the big GMO companies, they plant their crops right next to the heritage farmers, so it contaminates their crops and then take them to court saying they stole their genetics because the heirloom farmers use the same seed as the stuff they grew to plant the next year, which is going to contain any DNA that was introduced from the neighboring crop. They have basically copyrighted certain sequences of DNA, and then they sick their nasty overpaid lawyers on the little guys to run off the competition. The asswipes, Jack commented. Yeah, Blaze said. The old stuff is dying off, and we're losing those genetics forever. Stuff that farmers took hundreds of years to develop, poof, it's just gone. I read an article about a fava bean researcher that found a gal that had 17 fava bean seeds, 17, from a species he thought had been completely extinct. He actually managed to bring it back. Fava beans, Jack said. Yeah, she cried, gesturing. They're real good for cold, wet weather, but most people have never heard of them because they're controlling our food supply. The pricks. No kidding, Blaze agreed. Like most of America really only eats a single breed of each type of vegetable, when there used to be hundreds. Did you know there are thousands of varieties of heirloom tomatoes? And you see, 4 types in the store if you're lucky? Never been to a store, Jack said. See, that's cool, Blaze cried. That's what I want to do. She waved a hand at the window in the general direction of the woods. So I want to find some varieties that are good up here in Alaska. Did some research on that, but I've got to test some theories first, and then basically grow enough stuff to feed myself, my employees, and my guests. Cut yourself out of the system, Jack agreed. We're already off the grid out here, Blaze said, excitedly wiping her hair out of her face when it fell into her eyes. Why not wean ourselves from the huge agricultural conglomerates while we're at it? They barge all that stuff up from the lower 48 and it takes 2 damn weeks to get here anyway. Ends up all tasteless and mushy by the time it actually makes it into the grocery stores. And hell, we're just sending our money out of state unless you go into Fred Meyer's and buy Alaskan stuff like carrots and potatoes. Jack was nodding, looking fully enthralled, which only made her more excited. Finally someone who understood. Thank you, Jesus. So I figure I get the farm started this summer, Blaze went on, gesticulating emphatically. Fix up the lodge this winter, and have the place all ready for guests by next spring. I'll start small, maybe only a few heritage breeds, something like chickens and goats, maybe rabbits, and try to feed them as much as possible on the surrounding acreage, and supplement that with a few barge loads of grain and hay from the farmers in Palmer. You like to talk about farming, don't you? Jack said. Blinking, Blaze realized Jack was looking up at her with a calculating expression. Getting nervous again, she said, yeah, why? He shrugged and crossed his arms. Just an observation. Well, yeah, Blaze said. It just seems so wrong what they're doing. I mean, people are eating crap, stuff that isn't even real food. I mean, think about this. She lifted a hand and started counting off fingers with the other. They're turning animals into machines, they're breeding them stupider and lazier and screwing with their genetics, they're giving us hybrid fruits and vegetables that are bred for their abilities to withstand travel, not for their taste, they're bleeding all the nutrients out of the soil, so much so that people now have the crazy idea that homegrown chicken tastes funny. You know why that is? No clue, Jack said. It's 'cause they've got vitamins and minerals in the flesh instead of being raised in a cage, so damn fat they can't get up from the food dish. You know that's what chicken nowadays is, right? It's all the same crossbred Frankenchicken. Oh. Get over there. Just moving the punch and roll thing. You know that's what chicken nowadays is, right? It's all just the same crossbred Frankenchicken, Cornish rock. They finally hit upon the magic combo that switched their little muscle genes into such high gear that they grow so huge, so fast, that most can't even walk by the time they get to slaughter at 5 weeks. Tons of them die of heart attacks, just 'cause their tiny little hearts can't pump blood through all that muscle. So, what if I built you a farm? Jack said. From the ground up. Whatever you wanted. Barns, stalls, hutches, greenhouse, fields to plant, we'd make it happen. Blaze felt her heart melt at the idea. Oh, God, she giggled. That would be so cool. I mean, I know about it, but I don't have the technical skills to build a barn or, hell, even a chicken coop. I got all the plans, but really no way to implement them. He was peering at her like she had grown tentacles from her ears. You really like to talk about farming. Blaze frowned at him, breathlessly wiping more hair out of her eyes. How do you figure? He shrugged. I let go of your hand about 5 minutes ago. Indeed, he was standing in front of her, arms crossed over his brawny chest, eyeing her with obvious interest. Blaze froze. She froze. Blaze froze and glanced down at her hand. She'd been using it to gesture ever since her diatribe on the agricultural conglomerates. So, Jack said. Seeing how I got the technical know-how, I didn't rip your arm off, and you really seem to want to have a nice little ranch in the woods. What say we, go back home and drop some plans? Blaze bit her lip, once more realizing what the man claimed to be and just how freaking scary that was. Hey now, Jack growled, unfolding his arms from his chest in warning. Do we gotta repeat the last 20 minutes? No, Blaze said quickly. Then she gave him a considering look. You'll help me build a farm? On the side, Jack said. You'll be paying me to get the lodge up and running. You'll be paying me to get the lodge up and running. Don't really want to take the wind out of your sails, but farming don't pay near as well as getting a bunch of rich fucks in a boat and taking them out to trash the water for a few hours. I know, Blaze muttered. She took a deep breath, then let it out with a sigh. Just seems like I should be able to do something about all this, you know? He gave her a long, analyzing look. Then, shrugging, he said, Nope. Then, shrugging, he punched his iPad stand and made a noise that fucked up the take. Then, shrugging, he said, You will. What? Oh. Back, there we go. Then, shrugging, he said, You will. He turned back to the front of the cabin and yanked the chair out of... God. Appear to have hit a mistake minefield. Alright, let's see if we can do this. He turned back... Wait. Oh, wow. Okay. That was all recorded to the wrong track. What a comedy of errors. All right. Then, shrugging, he said, You will. He turned back to the front of the cabin and yanked the chair out from in front of the door. Come on. Let's get home before it gets dark. This far into spring, it was already almost 24 hours of daylight, but Blaze wasn't about to argue the point. When he opened the door for her, she stepped through it and out onto the tiny, rickety porch. Just so you know, Jack said, behind her, I can track something by scent. Though his words clawed at her insides, Blaze gave him a sweet smile over her shoulder. I'll have to remember to stock up on ammonia. Then she turned, stepped confidently out onto the weather-worn boards, and fell to her knees, vomiting over the edge of the porch into the grass. Jack immediately squatted beside her, giving her a worried look. You okay? I'm having minor digestion issues, Blaze whimpered, ashamed at the fact she'd been unable to hold it down. Must have been the flight. Jack watched her, his pretty green eyes telling her he knew exactly why she was feeling ill, and that he was sorry. Was pretty windy up there today, he agreed. Absolutely. Record absolutely real quick, and then I'll check in with the chat and see how y'all are doing. Absolutely. All right. Oh, thank you. Hello, how are we doing? Oh, you can't, Karen Wilson, can't imagine how amazing it will be with an ensemble cast. I know, right? I can't wait when my fellow actors get in there and replace the placeholder dialogue. I'm really excited to hear how Emma's gonna play Blaze off of Jack. That's gonna be really, really good. And then, of course, we haven't gotten to him yet, but we have the illustrious Jeff Hayes as Thunderbird. So, if you want to hear me do Thunderbird, what the placeholder sounds like, then you'll hear what I did, and then you'll get to hear Jeff like really do the character because he's got all of the character notes and everything. So he'll be a good time. I've heard him do that kind of character before, so it's gonna kick ass when he does it. All right, so who else? Agricultural romance, yes, Miss Nix. Oh man, Karen Wilson. I love how your personal inner monologue to yourself has a British accent. You know, I don't know why that is, but yeah, it's totally true. I don't know why that's been the case, but it's been the case for like at least a couple of years now. It's he's fun. He's a nice little inner voice to have. I don't know. Maybe it's because that affect has an inherently calming quality to it. So it's like, no, it's all fine. We can resolve this like rational adults. As opposed to my American accented inner monologue would probably be a lot angrier. Just like, come on, man, what the hell? All right. Alrighty. So, we are at Blaze said, and it shall be soon that we resume. Blaze said, once again feeling pain. Okay. Let's dive on in, and I'll check back with you all sometime in the next 30 to 45 minutes. Let's see what we can do here. Blaze said, once again feeling a pang of queasy fear looking into his deep green eyes. Inhumanly green, now that she thought about it. Her stomach heaved again, and she retched up the rest of her breakfast into the meager pile beside the porch. A big hand touched her shoulder. Hey. Sorry. You're an asshole, Blaze whimpered, but she didn't shrug off his grip. Surprisingly, Jack chuckled and rubbed her back. I'm a werverine. We're not exactly a friendly bunch. Blaze swallowed hard and met his gaze. His pants were still shredded, leaving him mostly naked as he squatted beside her. So, she managed. You bite me and I get sick and... Jack wrinkled his nose and snorted. No, my kind aren't into that shit. The wolves, on the other hand. He sighed. They've got dominance issues. Gotta have a pack, so they make themselves one, usually from whatever mortals strike their fancy, whether they're interested or not. It's them you gotta avoid. Now, if a werverine gets hold of you and don't like what he sees, he'll just sput you and get it over with. Sputch? But you could turn me, Blaze insisted. Jack made a dismissive sound, but his shoulders stiffened, the subject obviously making him uncomfortable. How? Blaze demanded, wiping her mouth with a sleeve. Jack scowled at her. I'm not gonna turn you into a... Tell me, Blaze snapped. For Christ's sake, what am I gonna do? Force you to bite me? She scoffed, though her whole body was trembling. Just ease my mind a little bit, okay? I'm trying to ease your mind, girl, Jack growled. I stopped turning people 4,000 years ago once the intrigue wore off. Blaze waited, watching him. Jack sighed, throwing up his big hands in surrender. "Fine! You saw those little teeth in the back, the ones that punched through?" "They weren't little," Blaze managed. "Those are them," Jack grunted. "They've got venom tubes, basically. Something gets bit with those, they're in trouble. Either their lunch, which is mostly the case, or sometimes they escape long enough for the poison to take hold. Then, it's a really long, really painful process of figuring out just what the hell is happening to them." He winced, his gaze growing distant. "Really painful." Then he shook himself. "Nowadays, most of us older ones see an accident, we sputch it. There's enough of us as it is. And the way humans are moving outwards, we're only getting more crowded." "An accident?" Blaze swallowed hard. "I'm sorry, I think I should head back to Anchorage." She stood up, intent on marching straight back to the lodge, grabbing her things and using her cell phone to call Candy Rogers to schedule the next flight out. Jack stood with her and caught her by the shoulder. "Hey," he said softly. "My mistake, all right? You're obviously not one of us, so it won't hurt to have you on my land." He gave her a wolfish grin. "Besides, you said you wanted a farm." Blaze's irritation rose despite herself at mention of his land. Nonetheless, she hesitated, remembering how the lodge had felt looming around her. She had been standing in her childhood dream, and it had easily been one of the greatest moments of her life, until it had been shattered by a monster dragging his tongue across her neck. Then again, she knew he wasn't going to have another... She wasn't going to have... She wasn't going to have... Then again, she knew she wasn't going to have another opportunity like this. Besides, who really cared if the area seemed to be inhabited by a shape-shifting lycanthrope? He seemed to be friendly enough. "Come on," Jack said. "I'll lead you home." He started off into the woods, hesitating just long enough to see that she would follow. Reluctantly, Blaze did. They chatted awkwardly about little things, how Jack had to hook up the battery system and show her how it worked, how the generator would probably need some tinkering before it would fire up, how the four-wheelers had all been put away in storage, until Blaze was simply too tired to make conversation. While she had maintained a gym membership back in Anchorage, trudging through the woods used a whole different set of muscles, and it wasn't long until she just wanted to sit down and die. Eventually, Jack sighed. "All right, sweetie, come here." He half squatted in front of her, showing her a large stretch of his muscular back. "What are you doing?" Blaze asked suspiciously. "I'm getting this show on the road," Jack said. "If we keep going like this, it's going to take hours." "It took me hours to get out here," Blaze said. Jack winced. Yeah. His green eyes caught hers, and she saw indecision there. "Well, see, that whole little jog took me about 10 minutes. Maybe. Once I stopped being Captain Oblivious upstairs." "Oh, shit," was all Blaze could think. So, yeah," Jack said. "Please, climb on." By the nervous way he was biting his lip, Blaze was pretty sure he wouldn't force the issue if she didn't cooperate. She opened her mouth to say she'd rather walk. Jack sighed and straightened. "All right," he resumed, picking his way back through the woods. Blaze, who hadn't spoken yet, said, "Just don't brain me on a branch or something." The Werverine gave her a surprised look over his shoulder, then obligingly squatted again and held position while she awkwardly climbed onto his back, like a Zulu mounting a midget. "Here goes," Jack said. "Hold on. This is probably going to scare the crap out of you. But it'll be over quick." And then he was growing fur underneath her hands, and Blaze was clamping her cheek to his hairy shoulder just to keep from having her head snapped off at the neck from the sheer speed at which they bounded through the woods. She squeezed her eyes shut, feeling sick again, and fervently began praying she didn't vomit down the Wereverine's fuzzy spine. "There we go," Jack said, sliding to a gravel-crunching halt in the backyard of the sleeping lady. He lowered Blaze gently to the ground, but she fell on her ass anyway, staring up at him in horror. "What was that?" she blurted. "Mach 2? He grinned at her as his fangs started sucking back into his face. "Never really had a way to measure it." He cocked his head. "Faster than a horse and buggy, though." "You think?" Blaze cried. Her world was still moving around her in a wild, twisty chaos in her inner ear, and she carefully puked into a pile beside her forearm. Then, shakily, she got to her feet and stumbled towards the lodge and her cell phone. "I'm really sorry I scared you, Miss Blaze." Blaze froze on the back steps, hearing genuine regret in the Wereverine's voice. She turned slowly and peered at him. He was standing in the middle of the yard, still dressed in his shredded remnants of jeans, wincing, looking like he wanted to say more. She looked down into his sincere green eyes, considered going back to her apartment in Anchorage, which only had another 6 days left on the lease, laughed in despair, then slumped against the doorframe of the lodge, using it to slide down onto her ass. All of her plans had just come tumbling down around her shoulders. She needed to decide, then stick with it. She glanced out at the decrepit outbuildings, the ancient, meager woodpile, the graying, weathered siding, the weed-strewn lawn. It was her childhood dream staring her right in the face. Unfortunately, so was Flash the Wereverine. "So, how's this gonna work?" she managed. "I mean, you seem nice enough. But do you eat people who piss you off? I intend to run a fishing lodge. With guests. Anyone who works in customer service knows that guests can be dicks. Truer words, Blaze. Truer words." Anyone who works in customer service knows that guests can be dicks. Jack gave her a pained smile. "I don't eat the other white meat. Too stringy. Tastes like chemicals." That he would know something like that was enough for Blaze to put another check mark next to "return to Anchorage." She dropped her face into her hands. The sleeping lady had spent 4 years on the market, possibly more, until some really tall rube in Anchorage dropped all 600 grand of her inheritance in it in an insane scheme to make her dreams of self-sufficiency come true. It might spend another 10 on the market until she could find someone to buy it from her, and she wasn't going to be able to pay off the loan, currently on a 1-year deferral to allow her business to get up and running if she didn't operate the lodge. "I am so screwed," she whispered to the rickety wood panels between her knees. She had just gotten so exuberant and excited like a goddamn 3-year-old. 4 years of business classes and 3 years of accounting work completely tossed out the damn window the moment she had a chunk of change actually worth anything sitting in her bank account. She was a disgrace to her family name. And it wasn't even her family. She'd been freaking adopted. The rat fucks should have told her, not let her find out when they died. Blaze quickly rerouted that thought, knowing it would lead to tears. And the last thing she wanted to do right now was become a sobbing wreck and deal with the consequences that followed. "I always wanted a farm," she confessed to the porch. "A place of my own out in the woods, you know? Ever since I was a little kid." Jack, a total stranger until she had called him a week ago in search of a maintenance man, gingerly climbed the stairs and lowered himself against the opposite frame, listening. "I've always had a good head on my shoulders," Blaze continued. "Only really get worked up about the way the agricultural conglomerates have been taking the life out of foods, but that's just crazy, right? I mean, who cares about that shit?" "It's not crazy," Jack said softly. Without lifting her head, Blaze snorted. "You don't have to patronize me." Shaking her head at the porch, she said, "No, I'm usually not this knee-jerk. I just got that check. $600,000 after taxes, and I just kind of dropped everything and headed for the bush. Thought I'd found a way to make my dreams come true. Who says you haven't? Jack asked. He was picking at a splinter in the weathered wood. Blaze gave a mirthless laugh and gestured at him. Jack glanced up at her quickly with a frown. I'm not running you off. Blaze snorted miserably. I'm not, Jack insisted. And frankly, I'd rather you stayed. He'd rather she stayed? Blaze blinked at him, suspicion rising within her at the way his words almost sounded like a plea. Gee, her logical mind said, what would a lonely little man all alone out in the woods want from an all-too-available female? I mean, Jack said hastily, I can protect you. You obviously can't take care of yourself, so I'd do you a favor and keep you safe. Yep, that answered it. He was going to do her the favor of screwing her. Blaze felt her hackles raise. I can take care of myself. Jack said. No offense, Blaze, but you start walking in any direction from here, and you're gonna run into something that would spot you as soon as look at you. Blaze didn't know what sputch meant, but from the context, she was relatively sure that it wouldn't be pretty. Looking wistfully at the lodge's outbuildings, she said, maybe I could sell it and buy a new place in Canada, or somewhere. I told you, Jack growled. I'm not warning you off. Then what are you doing? She cried, exasperated. You attack me, scare the crap out of me, run me down, lick me, run me down again. I'm asking you to stay, Jack interrupted. Under my protection. I don't need your protection, Blaze said, bristling. Believe me, Jack said, holding her eyes for a long moment. You do. He sounded utterly serious. And considering that he seemed to have the ability to shapeshift into a monster at will, a tiny little self-preserving part of Blaze suggested that maybe she ought to listen to the little man that sprouted... Slurred that one. Actually, I dropped something into the wrong track, so let's fix that real quick. Oh, no, don't do that. There we go. Says, believe me, you do, is where I want to start. Okay. And back in we go. He sounded utterly serious. And considering that he seemed to have the ability to shapeshift into a monster at will, a tiny little self-preserving part of Blaze suggested that maybe she ought to listen to the little man that sprouted hypodermic fangs when he got angry. Deciding to change the subject, she said, So, what do you want from me? I mean, aside from a paycheck. I want you to stay, Jack said. He shrugged. After that, who knows? Blaze glared at him. I'm not screwing my employees. Jack gave her a startled, half-cocked stare, then blurted, Lady, did I ask you to screw me? The way he said it, she might as well have asked him to go screw a rhino. Well, question answered. The headline was written all over his face. Greek god not interested in screwing Yeti. Cheeks heating, once more fully aware of his beautiful, perfectly chiseled body, and just how awkward and ungainly her own 6'4" form really was, Blaze said, So, what do you know about farming? Farming? Jack twitched, like his brain was still fully occupied with trying to picture the nasty mechanics of elephantine sex, then said, A lot. Anything you decide to grow is going to do well. Blaze felt somewhat irritated at his ego. I was asking for facts, not boasting about your farming skills. He frowned at her. I wasn't... Then, cutting off, he muttered, What do you want to know? Raised a lot of rabbits in Russia, had goats in Arabia, chickens in Japan, pigs and cows in the colonies, geese and ducks, anywhere there was water. Hell, sometimes just trapped some wild ones and started breeding my own. Wow, Blaze thought. This dude's well-traveled. Hiding her surprise, she said, "How about potatoes? You know anything about those?" He snorted. "More than I care to. You clear a spot of land, dig a trench, drop a few spuds in the bottom of it, and in a few months you're gonna have 'em coming out your ears. So many you gotta hand 'em out to the neighbors. Hell, more if you find your—" He suddenly bit off his words and gave her a wary look. "More if I find my what?" Blaze asked, curious. "More if you use fertilizer," Jack said, quickly lowering his head in a manner that told her he had been about to say something else. He started picking at the porch again, and now that Blaze was looking, she saw the point of a black talon extending from the tip of his finger. He was using it to idly scrape at the wood, drawing up more splinters. "Stop that," Blaze ordered. Jack frowned up at her. "Why? I'm just going to be replacing it when I rip out the porch." "I find it annoying," Blaze said, "especially when I'm trying to think." "Really?" He pried up more splinters, raking his finger across the deck. "I find it helps me think." As she sat there, listening to the scratch-snap of wood, thinking about how her day had completely devolved around her, only feet from a man who had made a very convincing case that he wasn't human, Blaze began to wonder if this was what losing her mind felt like. "You were close to pissing me off," Blaze finally said. "Honey," Jack said. Scratch. Snap. "I've had a long day." "You've had a long day," she sputtered. "Who kidnapped you and went rabid kangaroo and licked you while drooling all over your shirt?" He lifted his head and gave her a flat look. Then he returned to drawing designs in the wood with his talon. Blaze took a deep breath and glanced again at the yard. She let it out between her teeth, forcing a smile. "All right, so we've agreed that you'll let me stay on your land and you'll protect me from—" She gestured at his finger where it was digging into the wood. "Things like you." Jack grunted. "Sorry to tell you this, honey, but there ain't nothing like me. Not anymore." I dropped that into the wrong one. And there we go. All right. He looked up at her and grinned, but it was fierce and filled with pain. "Wolves got the last one about 6 years ago. Part of how them assholes got themselves that land. Killed the gal that was sniffing around, seeing if I'd make a decent enough mate." He gestured to the south. "Pretty sure she sputched a few of them, and there's more than one who's got a good limp now. But I haven't seen her since they moved in." "Maybe they drove her off?" Blaze suggested, a bit horrified. He shrugged. "Maybe. Scratch. Snap. But I doubt it. We, kinda have trouble backing down once we're worked up." He gave her a sheepish look before returning to the porch. "Werverines," Blaze said, just to make sure. "Like werewolves." Jack snorted. "Nothing like those drooling pussies." To distract herself from the way he was demolishing her porch, Blaze started picking dead grass and loose twigs from her hair, deposited there from her tumble in the woods hours before. "So we agree you're gonna let me stay." It still grated her to say that, considering she had spent over $600,000 for that. Cooperate with me, voice, goddammit. Considering she had spent over $600,000 for that, right? "Sure," Jack said, as if she had been asking. "I'll let you stay." He kept prying at the wood. By the way he wouldn't look at her, she felt like he was hiding something. "I'm staying," Blaze bit out. "I don't have anywhere else to go." He gave her another quick look, startled. "You ain't got houses in town?" The casual way he said houses made her feel sick. Obviously, he had the wrong idea just how much money he was dealing with here. "Jack," she said slowly, "let me clarify something for you. Before I got the $600,000 from my dad, I was eking out a living on ramen and corn, working an accounting job during the day, taking classes at night, and sometimes I couldn't afford the corn when it came time to buy textbooks." "Huh," he said. She could see his prospects for that steak-buying money fade from his face so quickly it hurt. Poor guy. She wondered what his last good meal had been. It was pretty common knowledge that a good number of the bushrats out here were just barely eking by on the permanent fund dividend and food stamps. She actually felt bad for getting his hopes up. "But hey," Blaze offered, "all that could change if I actually get this lodge running. Then there would be enough money to throw around, you know what I mean?" He stiffened with a healthy case of poor man's pride. "I don't need your money." Sighing, Blaze said, "Okay, sure. So tell me about this farm you're going to build me." Jack snapped off a large shard of wood, then disgustingly picked it up and started using it to dig between his teeth. "Guess it all depends on what you want, Toots. I'm here for the next few centuries or so whatever you want, I can build it." He pulled out whatever had been stuck between his teeth and held it out, frowning as he examined it. Blaze slapped at a group of mosquitoes. Mosquitoes. Blaze slapped at a group of mosquitoes clustered on the back of her hand. "Something self-sustaining, if that's possible," she said. "Sure," was all he said. "What kind of materials and budget are we looking at?" This time, Blaze winced. "I've already scheduled some barge loads of lumber to be delivered in the next couple weeks. I can add some fencing to the mix." Jack sniffed the air between them, wrinkled his nose, then gave her a considering look. "You got a green thumb, don't you?" "It's why I want a farm," Blaze admitted. Jack nodded. "You get some plexiglass and I can build you a greenhouse. Big one. You like any particular fruit trees? Oranges, pears?" "Mangoes," Blaze said, laughing. "But nobody can get a mango to grow this far north." "We'll get you some mango trees then," Jack said. "And whatever else you want." Blaze eyed him. I punched my iPad again and made a noise. "And whatever else you want." Blaze eyed him suspiciously, distrustful of his sudden willingness to please. "You make it sound like you're wanting me to settle in." Jack's fingers stopped working the splinter between his teeth. Blaze wasn't sure, but she thought she saw him blush. He coughed. "Girl, I've been around a while. A male's got a few important duties in his life, and a wise man knows it, and he does his job, quickly, without complaint." Blaze raised a brow, her hackles already bristling. She knew where the conversation was headed, and she'd heard such chauvinist crap before. "I already told you I don't need you taken care of, 'cause if they don't, they get bitched at till they do." He flicked the splinter across the yard. He crossed his beefy arms over his big, relatively hairless chest. "So, one-story greenhouse? Or two?" Blaze stared at him, caught between laughing and crying. "You can make it two?" she finally managed. "Two it is then," he grunted. "You got any idea what kind of critters you want on You got any idea what kind of critters you want on the place to start? Rabbits? Chickens? Reluctantly, Blaze told him her complete plan for the place. Jack raised his eyebrows, but he didn't say it couldn't be done. On the other hand, for some time he didn't say anything at all. Then, "Yaks, you say?" He seemed dubious. "Don't those live up in the Himalayas?" "They're more feed efficient than cows," Blaze said, her spine straightening under his scrutiny. "And their milk is richer." But you said you wanted cows, too, he said, frowning at her. Highlands and Galloways, Blaze agreed. They're heritage breeds. Really hairy, raised in Scotland, hardy as hell. Can eat brush as well as grass. He gave her a long look, then, slowly, nodded. And you eventually want to turn this place into a Renaissance fair? Only during a couple weeks in the summer, Blaze said. I'm hoping to get 400 to 500 people to show up, offer free flights out and everything. Give them all a taste of what life is really supposed to be like. Good food, no internet, no TV, but that's years from now. Jack looked ill. No offense, boss, but I kinda like my privacy. They won't leave the grounds, Blaze promised. We'll be roasting our own pigs, butchering our own chickens. Nobody will need to go off hunting in your territory or anything. He gave her an irritated look. This is my territory. It's only 30 acres, mister. I've got 10 square miles, Blaze snapped. And if I can get 500 people to show up in the summer and get some cabin rentals and campsites built, we're looking at almost $200,000 a year, pure profit. That got his attention. She could see his stomach calculating out just how many good steak dinners that would be for him that winter. For 2 weeks a year? He asked. Oh, wait, that's not incredulous at all. Be incredulous, Jack. For 2 weeks a year? He asked, sounding incredulous. That's it, Blaze said. And if we get the client base for an agritourism sounds like something. That sounds like a different kind of tourism. Agritourism. And if we get the client base for an agritourism group going, then we could earn more money that way. Agritourism. He sounded like she was talking nuclear physics. It's basically people who live in the city who get tired of the traffic and the stress and want to hire out a cabin out on a farm for a week or two, just to get out of the fast lane for a bit. We totally have the setup, too. We, Jack said, looking cautious. Blaze shrugged. No way I could do it alone. You help out, I'll cut you in on the profits. Jack grunted, then wrinkled his nose. Tentatively, he said, Do you have any idea how much work you're talking about here, sister? That's like full-time jobs for 10 people. Just the fishing lodge itself. Hell, that's gonna take you, me, and a couple more guys as it is. Blaze deflated even as her pride prickled. Then I'll hire people. Jack snorted. You and what inheritance? Oh, the bastard. Another check mark went up beside return to anchorage. Shields down, Captain. Engines at 12%. Wasn't looking good, Jim. Wait, that needs to be more Montgomery Scott. Shields down, Captain. Engines at 12%. Wasn't looking good, Jim. Blithely unaware of her scowl, he went on. I get the pigs and the cows. They're good eating. I get the birds because they're easy to keep. I even get the goats, the buggerin' little bastards, but yaks? Blaze shrugged. I don't know. I've just got this feeling like maybe the world won't be around here much longer, and I'm gonna do what I can to save a piece of it. Jack stiffened, his green eyes squinting at her. What do you mean? Blaze laughed. She never told anyone of her fears of an impending apocalypse, knowing they would laugh her out onto the street. Somehow, though, faced with this man-beast thing, she felt confident enough to tell him. After listening to her explanation, Jack grunted. He started picking at the deck again in silence. Scratch, snap. Scratch, snap. Just when Blaze thought she was going to lose her mind, he said, So, you want to save some heritage breeds, grow some heirloom veggies, and maybe see us through the end of the world, is that it? The blunt way he put it made Blaze's spine stiffen. He thought she was crazy. He, a goddamn slitty-eyed freak, thought that she was crazy. But his voice was low and serious when he said, You got any particular reason why you feel like the end is coming? He looked at her, and when his eyes met hers, they were utterly alert. waiting. Blaze let out a nervous laugh under his acute stare, caught completely off guard by his solemnity. Just my gut. Like the Earth was never meant to hold all these people, and Mother Nature's gonna end up fixing the problem. When his gaze sharpened, she anxiously picked a few pieces of dried glass. How would that even work? Oh man, the things my eyes tell me I'm seeing when what's actually there actually makes sense. Dried grass. She anxiously picked a few pieces of dried grass from her shirt. Quickly, she added, "Probably just all the books and movies out there? Kinda rubbed off, I guess." He grunted, his brow wrinkling in thought. Then he shrugged. "Sounds doable." As if that were the end of the conversation, he pushed himself to his feet and held out a hand to assist her. "Let's get inside and get the door shut. We're letting the bugs in." Warily, Blaze took his hand. Jack heaved her to her feet like a lead statue, then released her hand like it was infested with lice, staring down at his forearm. Following his gaze, even Blaze noticed the goosebumps that crawled up his skin at her touch, like he'd dunked his arm in ice water. "Still ain't gotten used to that," he grumbled, opening and closing his big fist like he'd just slammed it into a brick. "Used to what?" Blaze demanded, more than a little unnerved to see that kind of reaction on a guy who spent half his time running around sprouting fangs. Jack glanced up at her, and for a moment, it looked like he was going to say something really important. Then, he let out the breath he'd been holding and shrugged. "Nothing." Then, to her consternation, he turned his back and went into the basement. Beside the wood stove, however, he paused and glanced over his shoulder. "How long would you say we've got?" "I need to start running guests through this place by next summer," Blaze said. "The Renaissance Fair is going to have to wait until I can get the cabins and the livestock around. Probably like 10 years, who knows?" "I mean until Mother Nature gives us the boot." Blaze hesitated, caught off guard. Maybe 10 to 15 years?" He grunted. "The Fae have been saying 5. Then he brought out a second flashlight, flipped it on, and started up the stairs, leaving Blaze staring after him. Ooh, good cliffhanger. Okay. So there we go. Start chapter 3. I will check in with you all momentarily. I'm just adding a couple things. My camera's like up above my iPad and my computer's down here. I need to get the monitor shifted so that I don't just suddenly duck out of frame for my cold reads. But we will see. It will do for now. I need to get a monitor I can like hang above me. But oh well. Okay, 181.3. There we go. Cool. Beautiful. Alrighty, and off we go to chapter 4 right after I see how everyone's doing. Miss Nix, I am actively getting murdered playing Elden Ring while I listen in. Well, I hope it has made the experience of actively getting murdered more fun. Sputch. Yeah, that's a fun word. Oh, did I miss puns? There's a pun war in the chat. I'm nipping these puns in the bud. Oh, thank you. Oh, man. Alright, let's see. Chapter 4. We're tongue-twisted. Oh, yay, it's a Jack perspective chapter, that's right. So we get to, these are good. Okay. Let's see what we do. Oh, man. Okay. Chapter 4, Tongue Twisted. Let's see just how tongue twisted. Alright, here we go. Chapter 4, Tongue Twisted. Jack helped the sleeping lady's new proprietor get settled in for the night, then retreated to the woods to sit and watch the place, thinking. He was actually rather shocked when the leggy redhead didn't try to sneak off again. He would have bet a sword would have. Slurred that a bit. That would not make the proofer happy if I keep a bunch of slurred words in there. That's a lot of extra work for them. Enunciate, Zachary. Do it now. He was actually rather... Oh, wait. Yes, so much so that I would have said it twice in the same book by mistake. Okay. He would have bet a sword she would have tried to rabbit on him the first night. It was, after all, an awful lot for somebody to digest for the first time, and it was a really long night to spend alone staring at the ceiling in the dark. And yet, he heard the unmistakable sounds of sleep coming from the room she had requisitioned for herself. My voice is betraying me right now. All right, come on. And yet, he heard the unmistakable sounds of sleep coming from the room she had requisitioned for herself. He sat down under a spruce, listening to the rhythmic sounds drifting from the basement, wondering what the hell he was going to do with this fancy new critter that had landed on his doorstep. She was way out of his league. He had known that the moment she put her big-ass foot on his hand. On his land. On his hand. Why would she do that? On his land. Okay. He had known that the moment she put her big-ass foot on his land. It was pretty much the same feeling a lumberjack got when a grizzly snuck up behind him and tapped him on the back with a big hairy claw. That whole, hey buddy, hope you're packing fresh shorts, 'cause you're gonna need 'em moment. Yet Jack had always had a sort of death wish, and he'd spent his life flirting with danger like most guys flirted with women. And after spending centuries with a dragon, Blaze's particular breed of nasty wasn't as terrifying as it should have been, just interesting. Way too interesting. Gods, she was like a freaking alabaster-skinned goddess. An Aphrodite that made his breath catch every time he got too close. Just her proximity gave him those deliciously wicked goosebumps, and it had been everything Jack could do to keep her from seeing the way she made him pop wood every time she moved. Pretty didn't even begin to describe her long, coppery hair, or her fine, elegant lines, or her slender fingers. Jack quickly derailed that train of thought before it could go any further. He would not do that to another woman again. Never again. The world was just too dangerous to fall in love with a werverine, especially for some drop-dead gorgeous, painfully innocent chick from the city who seemed to have absolutely no freaking clue what was going on. Or what she was doing to him. Damn it, Jack thought, again crushing that thought. Not gonna happen, chump. She's a princess to your dick cheese. Some dragon's gonna come down and whisk her away, so don't even bother getting your hopes up. Then he realized he was thinking about saying fuck the dragons and trying to make the bond anyway, even after losing Tava to an Iron Maiden. And Jack started pounding his head into the nearest birch tree to clear it. He didn't need another mate. His mates died because of him. Because he couldn't protect them. Because they trusted him. And he failed. This cute little bird didn't need that. What she did need was for him to keep his damned distance. The less Jack's enemies saw the two of them together, the less chance there was. The less Jack's enemies saw the two of them together, the less chance there was that one of them was going to sputcher out of spite. Still, the tingles he got when she got close. Like freaking heaven had decided to part its clouds and shine its light down on his skin. Jack groaned just thinking about it. Heaven. Freaking heaven. It had been all he could do to leave her alone in her busted little room and walk out the back door to go back home. In all reality, he didn't even want to wander off what he now considered... Wait. Oh. My brain swapped some commas on me. Okay. In all reality, he didn't even want to wander off what he now considered, in growing bewilderment, her land. He could feel her energy in it already, spreading outward from the sleeping lady, mingling with his, invigorating it, giving it life. "Way out of your league," he muttered, slapping his forehead against the birch again. "Stop it, you dumbass, before you get another one hurt." Once he'd managed to get his reckless side back in check, he went back to his original plan of watching for intruders. And there would be intruders. With something like that settling down on his property, he would be lucky if he could fend them off with a freaking howitzer. The rhythmic sounds from the basement continued, and Jack was just starting to drift into a light doze when he heard a soft click from the front of the house. Inside, he heard Blaze continue to snore. Jack sat up quickly, summoning the beast in a liquid surge, and hurried around to the front of the sleeping lady. Actually, no, that wasn't said. That wasn't urgently said enough. Inside. Rhythmic sounds. I'm just going to do that portion again. Once he'd managed to get his reckless side back in check, he went back to his original plan of watching for intruders. And there would be intruders with some... There we go. And there would be intruders. With something like that settling down on his property, he would be lucky if he could fend them off with a freaking howitzer. The rhythmic sounds from the basement continued, and Jack was just starting to drift into a light doze when he heard a soft click from the front of the house. Inside, he heard Blaze continue to snore. Jack sat up quickly, summoning the beast in a liquid surge, and hurried around to the front of the sleeping lady. Immediately, however, his snarl cut short. Blaze was slipping out an open window. As he watched, she gave furtive looks in either direction, picked up a backpack that she must have thrown out the window ahead of her. There we go. And began tiptoeing across the weed-choked yard fully dressed. Behind her, something continued to snore. Crafty little bird, aren't you? Jack thought, his heart beginning to pound with the thrill of the hunt. This could be fun. As he watched, Blaze passed the shop and headed for Lake Ebony, no doubt because she didn't realize the neighbors were just a quarter-mile down the opposite trail, with satellite phones and battery systems and full contact with the outside world. Fun, Jack amended, watching her go, but why bother? Was he just going to keep her hostage for a few months until he grew on her gangly ass? How was he going to keep her from singing to the authorities about her hairy little kidnapper the moment she found a phone? Or keep her from telling Bruce everything the moment the pilot returned. Or keep her from telling Bruce everything the moment the pilot returned with their next load of supplies. Jack almost let her go. After all, his life would be a lot easier without something from the fourth realm gracing his doorstep. and he could always find new territory if he had to. Then that stubborn, death-wishy part of him that had always loved a good hunt kicked in, and he was loping off after her. Instead of simply running her down and dispensing with the bullshit, as he would have with any other girl that happened to accidentally complicate his life, however, Jack decided he needed to take another tack with this particular woman. Not only did he want her to hang around and be his business partner, but there was a deep, instinctive part of him that didn't want her to be afraid of him. He'd always had a soft spot for the womenfolk, and no matter how old he got, when they screamed and ran from him, it hurt. Gotta be polite, he thought, as he snuck through the woods to circle around and head her off on the trail to the lake. She was obviously a smart kid. He just needed to appeal to her logic. He thought he'd done a good job of that, letting her talk about farming and greenhouses and GMOs until she was blue in the face. But apparently she needed a bit more persuasion. "I'm rich," Jack thought, deciding that would be a good opener. "Honey, you stay with me, and I can buy you all the fancy chickens you could ever want." Even as he slid through the alders, Jack winced. Even to him, that didn't sound all that great. "I'm rich," he amended. "Stay with me, and we'll make you right at home." No, that was fucktarded. "I'm rich," he tried again. "I can help you build whatever operation you want at the Sleeping Lady. Just please don't go squealing off to the authorities that I sprout fangs. I've really started to like it here." No, that was just begging. "I'm rich," he thought, creeping through the underbrush, dodging under low-hanging branches. "What more could you ask for, honey?" Nah, that was just inviting her to say something nasty. Like, "Oh, I don't know, less of a midget?" Jack decided to strike that chain of thought and try something else. "I'm a badass," he thought. "You keep pissing me off, and I could rip off your head, and no, that probably wasn't the right way to get her to cooperate." "I'm a badass," Jack revised. "I can protect you. All you've got to do is stop being stupid and trust me to take care of you." Now, that hadn't worked the first time, and losing Henrietta still hurt bad enough that he didn't really want to promise that to another woman. "I'm a badass," he thought. "Of course you'd want to stay with me." No, that sounded too much like a damned dragon. In desperation, Jack ditched that train of thought too, and tried to come up with some other reason why she would want to stay with him. Rich and a badass, two things women loved, right? Somehow, though, he got the distinct idea that this woman, the lanky pain in the ass that she was, probably wasn't going to fall for his two most obvious assets. Then he had another startling thought. "You're still thinking you're going to try and keep her, aren't you, Jackie boy? Wake the fuck up, asshole. She's made it perfectly clear she's not going to be hanging around for long." Then, stubbornly, he decided that she wasn't going to get to make that decision. After all, she had made the mistake of putting her big foot on his land, so that made her his problem. And he was good at problem solving. All he had to do was figure out what she wanted. Jack settled himself into the center of the path, watching her dark shape move tentatively down the trail, towards him. A farm, obviously. And she probably wasn't too keen on the hairy little werewolf that had made an ass out of himself, but there had to be something he could offer to keep things from getting out of hands. "I'm a rich badass," Jack thought as she approached, a deeper shadow tentatively picking its way along the trail in the dark. "Man of your dreams, baby." No, 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 he thought with increasing frustration. He needed to say something eloquent. Something that would ease her fears, make her trust that he really wasn't out to rip off her head. Not for the first time he wished he had a dragon's command of the spoken word. He just wasn't good at these sorts of things. He considered that. What would a dragon say? "While neither of us asked for this, Blaze, I swear upon the blood of my ancestors that I will never harm you, nor will you ever have anything to fear from me as long as you live. Please accept my oath that you will be safe upon my lands, and that I will endeavor to help you to achieve your dreams and make this place your home." Blaze was almost on top of him as Jack frantically started working that over in his head, trying to figure out the best way to end it. Please, as I kneel down before you here this moonlit night, promise me that you will accept my honest service. Where the fuck do you think you're going? He blurted. Blaze gasped and dropped her backpack, hastily backing away from him, looking ready to bolt. Seeing the fear in her eyes, when Jack had done nothing but be nice to her all day, really pissed him off. He started growing fur and bang despite himself. Okay, toots, he growled. I guess that understanding we came to earlier didn't really do the trick. And I gotta go find a fuck ton of rope, because you ain't getting out of the lodge again until you can promise me you ain't pulling any more of this shit! Damn, he thought, as soon as he'd said it. What happened to the fucking poetry, you goddamned idiot? But it was too late, and Blaze was stumbling away from him, eyes about as big as dinner plates. Jack sighed and stepped towards her, deciding it was, at long last, time to dispense with the bullshit. He'd learned a while ago that it was a lot easier on everybody involved to tie up the babes first than explain yourself later. She was actually lucky she was a babe. If she'd been a guy, Jack would have gutted her by now. Wait! Blaze cried, holding out a panicked hand between them as she... Wait! Blaze cried, holding out a panicked hand between them as he started towards her. Please don't! Jack grimaced. She'd said please. He hated it when the girls said please. Wrinkling his nose at her, he muttered, So you weren't just trying to boogie out of here after we had an agreement, sister? She glanced at her feet and scuffed at the dirt with the toe of her boot. That was not articulated well enough. Let me try that again. We had an agreement, sister. She glanced at her feet and scuffed at the dirt with the toe of her boot. He could smell the fear rolling off of her, and it made him grimace. I told you, you got nothing to fear from me, girlie, Jack muttered. I know, she blurted, lifting her head quickly, actually looking embarrassed. I just, She swallowed hard. Had a bad dream. Just thought maybe I should go. She wasn't off to sing like a canary, Jack realized, a little stunned. Jack folded his arms over his chest, peering up at her. Why? You already told me you ain't got nowhere to go. Honestly? She whispered. No, I want you to lie through your teeth, Jack retorted. Because you're an asshole, she said. I don't think you get along with guests, and you already made it clear I can't tell you to leave. Jack's mouth fell open. Well, she's got you there, Wonder Boy. I can fix stuff, he blurted. All sorts of stuff. Trucks, toilets, chainsaws, you name it. And I'm good with wood. Saws and hammers and shit. Anything you want to build, we can build it. Please, don't run off. Good with wood? His mind babbled in a panic. Oh, now that was smooth. She peered at him warily, and he saw all the intricate little gears turning in her head. Has my body decided to choke me with my own spit? Okay, here we go. She peered at him warily. And he saw all the intricate little gears turning in her head as she watched him with the... And he saw all the intricate little gears turning in her head as she watched him with all the alertness of a fox. Why are you so interested in having me stay? Oh, shit, Jack thought. What? Windmilling. Windmilling to recuperate from such a blunder. 'Cause it's been a while since I had a decent neighbor that wasn't a loudmouth gossip who spread rumors I've been living here since the gold rush. The last thing he wanted her to know was just how decadent her presence was making the ground he was standing on, and how if he could feel it, other woodland creatures were going to feel it, and pretty soon his territory would be crawling with all sorts of edible furry friends. Blaze lifted an eyebrow at him. But you said you have been living here since the gold rush. Yeah, Jack muttered. But she don't need to go telling everybody. He hated the way it sounded like he was sulking. He wasn't sulking. He was in charge here. He needed to put his foot down, tell her she was way out of line, and he was going to tie her ass to the... So are you going to stop being an asshole? She asked. Yeah, he said. Blaze crossed her arms, and her elbows came to rest about at his nose level. Somehow I find that hard to believe. Immediately, his hackles shoved through his skin, and he snarled, "Oh yeah? You'll find it easier to believe when I shove your head up your..." He cut himself off abruptly, a growl rattling in his chest. Biting out every word, he said, "I'll see what I can do." She raised an eyebrow. Narrowing his eyes at her, Jack said, "It might take some work. Don't get your hopes up too quick, all right? Give me some time." "You've got a year," Blaze agreed. "A year," Jack said, relieved. "You could do that. 1 year. To learn how to not be an asshole. Yeah, piece of cake, no sweat, easy peasy, just a few minutes a day." Then he frowned, wondering how the hell him running her down in the woods had left him promising to be nice to people. He peered up at her with increasing wariness, trying to piece together how this leggy little vixen had warped the conversation to this new low. "So, you're..." "So, you done trying to run off?" he asked slowly, trying to recover some of his control of the conversation. Except it came out like a goddamned Mexican standoff. One where she had all the guns. Yeah, he really needed to find a way to put his foot down. Blaze shrugged. "You done being a dick?" "I could rip off your arms and bury you in the hill!" Jack roared, growing to eye level with her and sprouting fang. Blaze peered back at him flatly. Blaze peered back at him flatly, looking utterly unconcerned. "You done?" Jack's jaw fell open, utterly taken aback by her lack of fear. Good," she said. "I'll be back at the lodge. The battery on my phone's probably just about dead from looping that recording, and I still gotta call Bruce in the morning." Without another word, she bent down, picked up her backpack, and headed back up the trail, leaving Jack staring after her, mouth agape. "Way out of your league, buddy." Okay. Very smooth, Jack, very smooth. see how everyone is doing. Yes. Very good with wood. Hello, Jacob. How are you? Let's get some air in here real quick while I say hello to the chat and see how everyone is doing. Man. Miss Nick's crashing out for the night. Well, thank you. Jack's inner monologue is honestly like one of my favorite things about this whole thing. It's so much fun. What would a samurai say? I friggin' love him. Terry Renee, I love this book this guy's doing. Oh, thank you. Oh, my inner British monologue is different dialect. Yeah, you know, I think it depends on the problem. You know, if I need someone to be a bit more blunt, I'll go Cockney for a while. I'm glad to say you heard Liverpool, though, because Liverpool is one of the hardest ones for me to do. I seem to only be able to do it by accident, at least for now. Alright. Let's see how long we've been going. Oh, wow, we've been in here almost 2 hours already. Sick. Alright. So, let's see how far we can get. And here we go. Okay, let's make sure the narration track is actually recording. We are off to a roaring start. Fantastic. Okay. Maybe don't record clapping either. Jesus Christ, man. All right. Keep the enthusiastic start claps internal and out of the track. Chapter 5. To be spunched. Over the next few days... I need to emphasize that a bit more. Over the next few days, Blaze worked out an uneasy truce with her new business partner. Though she was technically the boss, she had absolutely no idea what it took to get the place on its feet again, and they both knew it. Thus, she ended up following him around like a very large lost puppy as he started fixing up the grounds, doing her best to keep up, getting frustrated when he made it look so easy. The boards came off the windows first. Then Jack began the complicated process of getting the generator running again, after 4 years of sitting idle. Between taking it apart, changing the oil, cleaning rust and corrosion off of parts, griping about cobbled-together pieces of shit, and putting it all back together again, that took almost an entire day on its own. In the end, Jack had to jump it with the battery off of his four-wheeler. Though Blaze had assumed the machine and trailer he'd used to pick her up at the lake had been part of the lodge package, Jack took her to an old shed and showed her the 3 dusty four-wheels sitting on flat tires in the back of the jumble of mechanical junk. Which, Jack less than politely informed her, wasn't junk. "It's all got its uses," he growled, sounding offended. Now that the generator was running, he had pulled an air compressor off of the shelf in the big shop and had dragged it out to the shed. He was hooking a hose to the flat tires of one of the four-wheelers, glaring at her over the handlebars. "Everything in here is something you're going to need me to use for you someday, sweetheart." Blaze bristled at sweetheart, but by then she had learned that mentioning it only made the bastard repeat the offense about 500 billion times. "Is there anything I can do to help?" she growled, watching him work. "Yeah," Jack said, wrestling with the tire. Blaze's heart skipped. Being both a gifted klutz and mechanically incompetent, she had been feeling like a fifth wheel all morning. "What?" she asked, hopeful that it would be something other than fetching a tool for him this time. "Get out of my light!" He gestured at the open doorway and the sun beyond. Blaze stared at him for some time before she narrowed her eyes. "I'm going to go pull weeds." "Don't waste your time," Jack said, distracted with the ire. With the tire. Also distracted with ire, but tire. I love when my brain just deletes letters like that. It's great. Jack said, distracted with the tire. I can mow them down later. I'm going to go pull them, Blaze said sweetly. It should be relaxing to have the company of a few noxious garden pests over a glorified wall ornament. His head snapped up and frowned. So what crawled up your asshole? But Blaze had already turned and was walking back to the shop. She snagged a pair of men's work gloves off of the wall. Blaze, embarrassingly, had neglected to bring her own, not realizing just how rough and dirty much of the reconstruction work would be, and yanked them onto her hands. The gloves were too tight, riding the tips of her fingers. But Blaze left them there anyway and headed out to the yard, mentally adding it to the list of things she would be buying on the next town run. She pulled weeds until she got blisters through the gloves and kept pulling. She had gotten a full 20-foot wide swath of land finished when she heard Jack start up an engine inside the four-wheeler's shed. Expecting a four-wheeler, Blaze was shocked when a few moments later Jack rode a lawnmower around the edge of the shop. He saluted, then kicked the blades into gear, sending a gust of chopped grass and pulverized tree shoots in her direction. In 30 seconds, he had covered more lawn than Blaze had tended in 4 hours. Blaze jumped up and stormed into the lodge, listening to the whine of the mower at her back. She slammed the door and dragged a chair in front of the wood stove, staring at the orange tongues flickering behind the tiny glass portal in the door as she fumed. Flames had always calmed her, which was a good thing, considering that the next step after fuming was starting to cry. And Blaze would rather stick the barrel of a 12-gauge down her throat than cry again. It was so inconvenient, unpleasant, embarrassing, and she was not going to do it in front of a 450-pound weasel. Blaze stared into the flames for long minutes, listening to the mower as it circled the big yard. Then, once she had calmed down, she got up, went outside, slamming the door behind her again, and stalked right out into Jack's path and stopped. For a moment, it looked like Jack wouldn't slow, and she was playing chicken with a lawnmower. Then, reluctantly, he kicked the blades out of gear and turned off the machine, rolling to a halt a few inches from her big boots. Blaze slammed a fist down on the lawnmower's front. "I hate feeling so useless!" she snapped. Both of Jack's brows went up. "You just dented the hood." "I don't care," Blaze said, denting it again. "It's my hood. Find me something useful to do before I lose my mind." The Werverine grunted. He peered up at her like a fox analyzing just how long the Yeti would make a nuisance of herself before she... He peered up at her, like a fox analyzing just how long the Yeti would make a nuisance of herself before she got bored and trundled off. "It's not up for debate," Blaze growled. "You want to check? I want something to do." The Werverine heaved a huge sigh and climbed off the mower, the muscles in his arms and shoulders flexing as he dropped to the grass. "Okay," he said. He gave her a dubious look. "You know how to run a bulldozer?" Blaze flinched inside, but she forced herself to remain stoic. "I'm sure you could teach me." He looked her up and down, then grunted. "Maybe." Without another word, he turned and walked off, leaving Blaze standing with her fists still resting in this brand-new pucker of the lawnmower's hood. Frowning, with him giving her little else to do, she straightened and followed him. He took her around the back of the last outbuilding, to a forlorn-looking parking lot of heavy machinery. Old fireweed stalks had grown up and died around the 6 rusted metal monstrosities, which were for all the world looking as if they were slowly returning to the earth. Jack stopped at the biggest one and climbed up onto a long metal track so he could peer into the leaf-strewn driver's compartment. He cursed and jumped down, without another word, stalking back over to the shop. He came back out with a key, which failed to get the machine started when he inserted it in the ignition. He came back out with a key, which failed to get the machine started when he inserted it in the ignition and turned it. It took another 2 hours for Jack to add the various fluids, charge the battery, check the gas tank for water, clean out said water, and otherwise get the engine sounding like something other than a dying weed whacker. Blaze was actually rather impressed when he fired it up for the 14th time, to the sound of a low, healthy rumble. She didn't say as much, of course. The prideful bastard already needed about a 7-peg attitude adjustment. "There," Jack said, making a satisfied grunt. He gestured for her to get in the driver's seat. "I'll show you how this baby works, then you can go play in the woods for a while." Blaze narrowed her eyes. "I told you I want something important to do." "You want yaks, right?" Jack demanded. She stared at him in confusion, her mind unable to follow the convoluted twist that had brought the werverine from bulldozers to yaks. "What does that have to do with an angry yellow machine?" she finally demanded. He groaned and dropped his head into his hand again. "Just get in the seat," he growled. "You're gonna go make some pasture for your damn farm animals." Blaze froze, realizing he meant for her to push down trees. She glanced up at the towering birch and spruce all around them, suddenly not feeling so confident. Well?" he snapped, gesturing at the seat. "Or you gonna chicken out and make me do it?" When Blaze only stared at the rumbling machine in horror, Jack sighed. "Better be some good hot food waiting for me when I get back," he said. "I'm tired of this cold sandwiches and fruit shit." And I'm tired of punching my iPad. "I'm tired of this cold sandwiches and fruit shit." He started crawling into the cab, snarling that he could make his own damn food. Snarling that he could make his own damn food from whatever meager supplies he could scrounge from the pathetic contents of his own pantry, Blaze shoved him out of the way and climbed into the seat herself. "Okay," Jack said quickly. "Now don't touch anything until I've given you an explanation." He then spent the next 20 minutes detailing just how deadly the machine she was sitting in could be, and just how many ways she could tip it over, dig her own grave, plow into something important, or otherwise get herself killed. Here and there he would intersperse his warnings with a hint or two about how the machine worked, right before he launched right back into how easily she could sputch herself. Sputching, Jack informed her when she asked, was a werverine term for the sound of blood and gore exiting the body as one's soon-to-be corpse can... Sputching, Jack informed her when she asked, was a werverine term for the sound of blood and gore exiting the body as one's soon-to-be corpse contacted something brutally hard, sharp, or otherwise destructive. Generally, it applied only to non-weres, aka mudborn, when attacked by a were, dragon, titan, vampire, or other critter with the power to squish, stab, flatten, dismember, or otherwise brutally and liberally spread gore across at least 50 feet with a good kill. In other words, to be sputched, Captain, was to become gore. And Jack had a word for it. The return to Anchorage column got quite a few more check marks during that particular lecture. Blaze found, however, to her amazement, that the gruesome scenarios he painted in her mind somehow fixed the meanings of the controls into her brain. Under Jack's direction, she was able to raise the blade, move the machine forward in halting jumps, and even turn it slightly. After a few minutes of watching her, Jack gave her a thumbs up and walked back toward the four-wheeler shed. "Wait!" Blaze cried above the roar of the engine. "Where am I supposed to put a pasture?" Jack grunted and made a dismissive gesture at the trees. "Wherever you want it." Then, his broad back was disappearing into the dim interior of the shed, his tight t-shirt giving her yet another excellent view of his chiseled torso before the shadows swallowed him. Blaze scowled after him a moment, but when she realized that he wasn't going to come back out and offer any more assistance, she reluctantly turned the dozer towards the woods and started forward. 3 hours later, Blaze had a 20-foot square patch of churned earth, and she had just pushed down her first tree. She felt an exhilarated thrill as it groaned and came down, and automatically turned to see if anyone had been paying attention. Jack had been standing 10 yards off, tool-filled work belt clinging to the sexy bulk of his thigh, watching her. Seeing her look, he grinned and gave her another thumbs up, then headed back to the shop. It got easier after that. Once she had the hang of it, Blaze managed to push over a good dozen trees, clearing a 40-foot swath through the woods. When Blaze finally shut the bulldozer off, it was the hazy half-dark of an Alaskan summer, indicating it was probably sometime after midnight, and she was all but giggling in glee. She had slid out of the driver's chair and was climbing down off the tracks when she saw the man watching her in the forest. He was tall and lithe, his lean form dressed in a pale robe that seemed to shimmer like a cloud in the dusky haze of the midnight sun. His hair was long, the braid having enough thickness and length to be flipped over his shoulder and wrapped several times around his waist, then tied like a belt. It was his eyes, though, that had left her feeling cold. They were flame blue, and they shone like twin lightning bolts in the dim light. When he saw her looking, he turned and unconcernedly walked away, seeming to disappear in the very forest itself. Blaze slowly lowered herself the rest of the way to the forest floor. Then, when she was sure the man was gone, turned and bolted for the lodge. The werewolf, at least, was a familiar evil. "I saw a wolf!" she cried, lunging inside and slamming the door behind her. She had to shield her eyes from the orange light of the gas lamps that Jack had found in the attic, and realized, looking out the blackened windows, that it was later than she had thought. Jack looked up from a book he had been reading. It was one of hers, a smutty action-adventure she was still looking forward to devouring once she had the time. Seeing it, Blaze bristled, knowing that the last time she had seen it, it had been safely buried in the bottom of her underwear duffel. "Thought you were going to be out there all night," Jack said, closing the book. He yawned, and she saw pointed teeth. "How many trees you get down?" "I saw a wolf," Blaze repeated, pointing in the general direction of where the guy had disappeared. Jack raised a brow. "So?" Glowing blue eyes. He just stood there, watching me, big, long braid, robes like he's the second coming of Jesus or something. "Wait," Jack said, frowning. "Hold on. Back up a sec. You said you saw a wolf? In a robe?" "Well, it was a guy," Blaze said. "But you told me about the werewolves, and he had evil, glowy eyes, and I'm pretty sure he wanted to eat me." Jack threw down the book in a snarl and got to his feet, a deadly look constricting his features. "You stay right here." He was already changing, his body growing in size and hairiness. Blaze flinched and got out of his way, which was just as well because the way he brushed past her, he probably would have knocked her down if she hadn't. He slammed the door open, probably broke off a hinge considering the metallic snap she heard, and then was out into the night, moving too fast for her eyes to catch up. The hinge was indeed broken. As she tried to drag the door shut against the bugs, Blaze made a mental note that next time a ghostly visitor appeared in the woods watching her to take Jack outside before telling him about it. Blaze settled for propping the door up against the jamb, then went back to the chair to pick up her book. She didn't see the man standing in the shadows behind her until he moved. His pale, shimmery robes blended with the walls as he stepped closer, something dark in his hands. When he stepped into the light of the gas lamps, his eyes sizzled with their own eerie blue light source, and every hair on Blaze's body suddenly lifted with a major case of static electricity. The man was looking at her over the open case of her father's feather. Blaze went absolutely still. She had hid the case in the bottom of the freezer, on the other side of the house. Still watching her, the man shut the case and handed it to her. He seemed to regard her thoughtfully a moment, then turned and walked deeper into the shadows of the basement. "Hey!" Blaze cried, the heavy case like a lead weight in her hands. "Stop!" When she went after him, however, the slender form simply vanished into the shadows. Heart hammering, Blaze yanked the case open. Her father's feather, a glowing mass of flickering golden fire tendrils as long as her forearm, was still tucked safely inside. Blaze swallowed and clicked the lid shut again, the sight still giving her the unholy willies. "Hello?" she called. The house was empty. Grabbing the case and tucking it under an arm, she hurriedly went upstairs, climbed into the loft, and set the case against a rafter in the attic, packing insulation around it as she tried not to hyperventilate glass dust. The last thing she wanted was the damned werewolf finding it, deciding she was somehow safe to eat, and then ending her dreams of a pretty little fishing camp in the woods. Pretty little was not enunciated sufficiently. And then ending her dreams. And then ending her dreams of a pretty little And then ending her dreams of a pretty little fishing camp in the woods when he chomped on her head. Still trembling, Blaze went back downstairs to sit with her back against the wall, the gas lamps illuminating the room all around her, and tried not to panic. This dude with glowing eyes had just plucked her feather out of cold storage and given her a quizzical look like, "Why do you have this?" and then vanished into thin air. "Dad," Blaze thought. "What the hell did you give me?" As the night wore on, and Blaze found herself alone but for the crackle of the wood stove, she realized just how creepy the woods could be at night when one was alone. She drew her legs up to her chest and settled her chin on her knees, and tried not to think about how quiet the place was. Jack came bursting through the door sometime much later, ripping it completely from its hinges in a feral snarl of teeth and talons. "That effeminate bastard led me on a merry fucking goose chase!" he roared, throwing a chair aside. It embedded itself into the wall even as his form began to shift into something a bit more human. "I ought to go up north and wring his damned neck!" He stopped in front of the fire, his clothes once again torn and tattered. His clothes once again torn and tattered, his ribbed torso visible under shreds of his shirt. Then he hesitated, sniffing the air. Fur started to sprout again as he said, "He was here, wasn't he?" He slammed a fist into the top of the wood stove, leaving a dent. "The arrogant prick!" He peered at her cautiously. "He hurt you?" Biting her lip, Blaze shook her head. "Offered to marry you?" The way he said it, Jack sounded almost serious. The hilarity of that was enough to drag Blaze out of her shock. Chuckling, she said, "Not likely." "Well, what did the feathered twit want?" Jack growled, as if marriage had seemed the most likely scenario. Blaze thought of the feather, then thought of the huge fangs. Then thought of my voice cracking and fucking up the take. Then thought of the huge fangs sprouting from Jack's mouth, and what they would look like from the inside. I'm not sure," she lied. Jack sniffed at the air, then scowled. "You're hiding something." "He didn't say anything!" Blaze cried. Jack gave her a long, hard look, then grunted. "Well, the little lightning-tossing dweeb shows up on my doorstep again, I'm gonna pluck me a turkey and roast it for dinner." "That was Thunderbird?" Blaze whispered, cold chills suddenly working down her spine. "You smell the rain?" Jack demanded, gesturing at the busted door. Blaze glanced outside and heard the soft patter on the porch roof through the gaping maw he had left behind. "You know," she said, looking at the ruined door, "drywall and lumber are expensive." Jack winced. Yeah. He scratched the back of his neck and gave a nervous chuckle, eyeing the new hole in the wall. I'll work on that. So what did he want? Blaze asked, looking out at the sudden thunderstorm, feeling a bit numb. Whatever he wanted, I'm sure he got it, Jack muttered. That elitist prick operates under the assumption that the world is his oyster and he's the pearl. Maybe he was afraid of taking anything, Blaze ventured, remembering the way the man had given her the feather almost thoughtfully. Afraid? Jack said, frowning. Why? She gestured at his ripped clothing. Jack threw back his head and laughed. Well, I'll take that as a compliment there, princess. And while it's true I can generally hold my own in a fight, the hard truth is that my furry ass wouldn't be the one crawling back out if the two of us got in the thick of things. He gestured out at the rain. You saw how easily he waltzed into the center of my territory without so much as a by your leave, and I didn't even sense the prick was nearby until you opened your mouth about wolves. Should we go talk to him? Blaze asked. Jack snorted. If the conceited ass had wanted to talk, he would have stayed. He probably just wanted to see what kind of interesting new critter had shown up next door. What kind of interesting new critter? What do you mean? Blaze asked nervously. Flinching slightly, Jack gestured at her body. Well, you ain't exactly Miss America there, if you know what I'm saying. He was probably just curious. He's saying I'm the latest addition to the freak show, Blaze thought, miserable. She looked down at her gangly body, her manly feet, her flat chest. Well, she said, refusing to cry. I guess he got a good look. He misjudged the agony in her face. Oh, don't worry, sister. He wouldn't have hurt you. Like I'm a helpless woman whose very existence depends on the charity of others. So much for first impressions. So, Blaze said, changing the subject from the one that was about to leave her running to her room bawling. That Thunderbird guy wasn't dangerous? The native-looking guy had just looked curious. Give this a save real quick. Okay. Sorry, just a little technical problem. Oh, Jack said, chuckling. I didn't say that, sugar. No. He shook his head. He's just so goddamn stuck up that he probably didn't think carting you off was worth his time. After all, he's supposed to be God's gift to America. Spiritual being from the heavens and all that. If he had wanted you, he would have just taken you. If you had tried to stop him, you'd be dead. Simple as that. Oh, Blaze whispered, once again wondering just how intelligent a decision it had been to stay in the bush with the werverine. Okay. So we're back to Neanderthals with clubs out here, is that what I'm hearing? You just grab a girl when you get horny and drag her back to your cave? Another check mark next to return to Anchorage. On a happy note, Jack said, he didn't take you and you're not dead. That means he's not gonna take you and he's not gonna sput you. At least for now. Two very positive developments that I've been dreading ever since I figured out what... He choked off the rest, his green eyes flickering in her direction warily. You figured out what? Blaze demanded, her attention sharpening. As if he hadn't heard her, Jack picked up some firewood and started feeding the stove. We'll pick out a spot for your greenhouse tomorrow, and we'll need to plow out some area for a garden. Traditionally, folk around here wait to get stuff in the ground till the 1st of June. Much earlier than that, and frost might kill it. Blaze laughed at him. "You were telling me you wanted to grow mango trees up here." He gave her an awkward look that said there was more accumulated in his tiny brain that he wasn't telling her. "Yeah, probably in a greenhouse." "Probably," Blaze scoffed. "We aren't wasting my greenhouse space on a mango tree." "You like mangoes?" Jack demanded. "Sure I do," Blaze said. "But there's some things that just can't—" "Then I'll have Bruce ship one out," Jack said. He left her sitting there, gritting her teeth, as he started pulling ragged strips of cloth from his body and left to get changed. Oh, yay. This is gonna be fun. Okay. Start chapter 5. And I shall join the chat in a moment, and I believe I've got the time to knock out at least one more of these things, and then we'll have a nice, good run complete. And we shall be ever closer to the most illustrious finished product. Fantabulous. Okay. And here we go. Oh, Jack coming down after Thunderbird. Yeah. Oh, God, I love Thunderbird so much. He's gonna be fun. He's gonna be fun. Oh, I missed my chance to say goodnight to Karen. But yes, good night, Karen. Thank you for joining. I was so happy that you were here to see this. Alright, let's see what we did. Oh, man. Okay, let's get some water and let's do... I think this might be the last one that I'll do for the evening, but who knows? Yeah, that'll be good. This will put us in a real good spot. Just keep busting this on out. All right. Start chapter 6. Here we go. Beautiful. All right. Chapter 6. Feathers and Fire Pits. The glorified turkey knew. Jack stalked around the sleeping lady all night on the off chance that he would come back and Jack could work out some of his frustrations on his pretty boy face. I slurred pretty boy. We're gonna do that again. The glorified turkey knew. Jack stalked around the sleeping lady all night on the off chance that he would come back and Jack could work out some of his frustrations on his pretty boy face. The worst part was he didn't know why it should bother him so much. If the feather-headed asshole wanted to come claim himself some pretty young wife, why should Jack care? More power to him, right? After all, she'd been nothing but goosebumps, sass, and heart-hammering panic since she got off the plane. Yet Jack paced through the woods with every intention of ripping the avian little asshole limb from limb if he caught him snooping around his territory again. And, he realized with a wince, he now firmly considered the leggy little bird to be his territory. Never mind the fact that she was so damn gorgeous he kept catching himself staring at her like a dipshit, or that she set all his hairs on end if she got too close, or that every fiber of his being was demanding to make her his permanently, before anyone else could do it. Jack paced, trying not to think of how much he wanted to cinch that bond and make her his. Between just casually walking past him while he was relaxing in the basement and leaning over to see what he was working on out in the shop, Jack was pretty sure he had a permanent case of the most delicious heebie-jeebies he'd ever felt. It had taken all of his control not to just seal the link that first night and deal with the consequences later. The oldest, feral part of him was demanding it. The sensation so strong, it was pulling at him, tugging him around like a puppet on a string. And it was all Jack could do to ignore it. Hell, he'd already accidentally barked at the poor girl several times. When she idly got close enough, she was setting his hairs on end. Damn it. Growling deep in his chest, Jack made another loop around the sleeping lady in the dark, already beginning to crave a circular path through the woods where his feet had plastered the moth and cranberry bushes to the ground. Carve a circular path, not crave. I said crave, it says carve. Already beginning to carve a circular path through the woods where his feet had plastered the moss and cranberry bushes to the ground. This was not how he'd wanted to spend his summer. He liked to relax. He liked to be alone. He liked not to drop things in the middle of narration that fucked his takes up. He liked to relax. He liked to be alone. He liked to chop firewood and watch the sunset. He did not like feeling like his chest was being wrenched apart by this beautiful Scottish temptress. Too close. He was getting too damn close. He'd only known her a few days, and he was already feeling that gut-clenching pang whenever he thought of her. This was not good. Not good at all. Hell, he might as well light his ass on fire, roast it good and tender, and hand it to her on a silver platter. Jack made another loop, listening to her sleep inside her cozy little basement, completely oblivious to the contortions she was putting him through. She didn't even seem to notice how damned sexy she was when she moved, which of course made it worse. All long leg and sinuous curves. "Stop it, you fool," he growled, disgusted with himself. "You got a strange little bird that showed up on your doorstep and you're already trying to pounce. You've been lonely way too long, buddy. She's out of your league. She's dragon bait, babe. Thunder butt dropping by proved that. Sooner or later, something else is gonna catch a whiff, and when it does, she's gonna be spirited off to some damned cave up in the mountains where you'll never see her again." But that wasn't helping the hammering in his chest, or the ache in his gut knowing that her silky, pale body slept stretched out only a few insignificant feet away, naked. He'd heard her undress. Damn it! Jack threw his head into his hands and pressed his palms to his ears, trying to force the images from his skull. This was wrong. This could not be happening. Not again. He wouldn't let it. She was just too innocent. She had no idea of the kind of crap out there, the monsters that would be happy to tear her apart, or worse. Just because she lived in the same square mile as Jack, he would not do that to another woman. Ever. Please, Aphrodite, Ishtar, Inanna, Venus, Ashtar, Freya, whatever the fuck you want to be called, Jack prayed. Don't let this get out of hand. If the goddess of love heard his prayer, she casually gave him the cold finger. Blaze didn't sleep well that night. Aunt had only gotten an hour or two when she heard Jack moving around upstairs near dawn, tinkering with the pipes. She crawled out of bed and went upstairs to figure out what he was doing, and why he didn't keep to normal workday hours. She found him on his hands and knees in the main upstairs bathroom, and the first thing she noticed upon tentatively pushing the door aside was the way his jeans were stretched deliciously tight against the hard, round curves of his buttocks. She swallowed hard but found herself unable to look away. "Should have the water turned back on by the end of the day," Jack said. He hadn't even looked over his shoulder. He was bent over the toilet, shirtless, peering down the back, muscular arms flexing as he fiddled with something inside. "Damn," he said. He leaned back on his knees and wiped sweat from his brow as he turned to her. His fingers were black with grease. "They literally disassembled this place. Drained every pipe, emptied every toilet, broke it all down." "Why?" Blaze asked, trying not to stare at the way his naked shoulders were rippling as he lowered his arm. The flat, "oh my god, I'm working for a stupid-ass city slicker" look that he gave her, however, was enough to drag her out of any potential fantasies in a hurry. "Thank you, Jack." "Gets about 45 below zero around here in the winter, boss," Jack said. He always used boss, she had noticed, when he felt she had done something particularly stupid, like he was reminding himself where his next meal was coming from. Blaze frowned. "I know that." She'd researched the weather extremes when she'd been deciding which crops to try and grow. When she added nothing further, Jack sighed. "Stuff explodes when water freezes." He tapped the toilet bowl with a knuckle, making the ceramic ring. Blaze felt her face redden furiously when she realized the obvious. "Oh," she muttered. Utterly humiliated. Yet again. Utterly humiliated, yet again, by the crass, utterly capable handyman shit. "But," Jack said, getting up, making the muscles in his abdomen ripple, "I can finish that later. Now that you're up, let's go get you caught up on the inverters. You tried to leave the generator running all night. You have a battery system here. If you don't shut it off once the inverters are done charging, you're just burning gas you could have used for winter." "Oh," Blaze muttered, feeling like someone had scalded her face in a pressure cooker. "No biggie, now you know." Standing, Jack peered up at her as she... Jack peered up at her as he shrugged back into his plaid long-sleeved shirt. After dropping the bomb that Thunderbird had paid her a visit, the wretched bastard had proceeded to tell her, "Oh, by the way, I'm headed home now. Have fun all alone in the dark." As if this kind of crap happened to him on a daily basis. Return to Anchorage had gotten quite a few checks that night while staring at the ceiling in the darkness of the creepy two-big house, a broken Colt arranged beside her bed. "You know," Jack said conversationally as he buttoned his shirt, "you don't have to know everything." Blaze blinked and stiffened. "What?" He gestured at the toilet. "So you didn't know the pipes would explode if they weren't drained. So what?" He cocked his head at her. "I'm sure you learned some stuff back in the city that I don't know." Blaze snorted. "Nothing important." He gave her an uncertain, wary look, seemingly trying to decide something as he scanned her face. "What about math?" he finally suggested. She frowned at him. "What, like calculus?" He cleared his throat and then looked away again. "Any math." Blaze stared at him. "You can't do math?" She hadn't meant it to come out as a sneer, but it did. Jack stiffened as if she'd hit him. "So, that's what it feels like," he said softly. He grabbed his hat off the floor and yanked it over his head, then moved to push past her. Blaze caught his shoulder. "Hey," she said softly. "Sorry." He gave her an irritated look. "Was just trying to make you feel better." Narrowing his eyes, he added, "You know, like I promised." Meaning he was still taking his oath seriously, and trying not to be an asshole. She frowned down at him. "Then you really can do math?" "Lady," he said in a growl, "I can't do math any more than I can read a book." Blaze snorted. "I saw you reading one last night." For the first time, she saw genuine longing in his eyes before it was quickly masked again by his callous snort. "Of course I can read. What dumbass can't read? It was a stupid book anyway." He gave an indifferent shrug. Hell, as old as I am, it's not like I haven't read every book there is out there already twice. All the time I've been around, hell, there were 1,000 places for me to learn something stupid like that. Every town had a school and every church had a pastor. Not too hard to learn. He shoved past her and started toward the stairs. "Wait a minute," Blaze called after him, her mind tumbling over his words. "You told me you stayed away from the cities." She saw his shoulders stiffened. Stiffened. He can't read. Stayed away from the cities. She saw his shoulders stiffen. He can't read, Blaze realized, her heart suddenly going out to him. All the brusque comments, all the cruel jabs were starting to make sense. Her heart started to pound as she realized he wanted what she had. Badly. So badly it hurt. "Want me to teach you?" Blaze asked as he started to walk off. His broad back hesitated again. For a moment, it looked like he would turn. Then, softly, he said, "I gotta show you the battery system." He ducked down the stairs, leaving her staring after him. Over the next brain-racking hour, Jack described the battery system, how it worked, how to charge it, and how to make it explode. Blaze could have done without the last part, but he seemingly took great relish in explaining to her what battery acid did to the wallpaper and human flesh. Then, once he was done with his heart-pounding lecture that left her somewhere between afraid to touch the generator and absolutely terrified of the car-sized nuclear device embedded in her basement, he said, "All right, let's go put in that garden before your pretty head implodes." She narrowed her eyes at the back of his head as he made his way out across the yard. Over the course of the next few days, Blaze once again fell into the role of Jack's errand monkey. He even took the bulldozer back from her when she didn't have the skills and finesse necessary to drag nice, even furrows through the dirt for her garden. Then, once garden and crop rows were complete, Jack stood around and started to tell her how to plant her seeds. "Let me do one thing by myself, all right?" Blaze snapped, unable to take his macho, utterly capable handyman bullshit anymore. Standing in the soft, newly exposed virgin earth that she was still tugging roots and grass clumps out of, she jammed a finger back towards the shop. "I pay you to get the lodge running, so go get the lodge running. I can handle this." Jack opened his mouth, looking like he wanted to say something, then shrugged and went on with his business. She saw him puttering around the shop and ground several times after that, a pile of lumber over his shoulder or a power tool in his hand. Working out her frustrations in the earth, Blaze spent a few days yanking out roots, shaking out sod clumps, and delicately arranging the garden rows into something usable. She planted about 100 different types of heritage seeds in small, well-marked test plots, and then spent a few more days planting heirloom, red, purple, and fingerling potatoes in the open and muddy. I messed up the emphasis there. And then spent a few more days planting heirloom, red, purple, and fingerling potatoes in the open, muddy field she'd uncovered with the bulldozer's massive blade. Potatoes in Alaska were a sure bet, kind of like cabbage, carrots, and peas. She planted those, too, though she didn't have much hope for the cabbage. Those, she knew, pretty much needed to be started 4 to 6 weeks early, in a nice, warm, sunny window. Blaze poured every ounce of her love and care into her new garden, even going so far as to endure the embarrassment of asking Jack to show her how to hook up the hose so she could water her rows. Instead of showing her, however, he just did it, and dragged the hose out of the shop and hooked it up to a little faucet she hadn't even seen set into the side of the sleeping lady, then switched it on and handed her the business end. Like she was a total moron. "Don't use it too much," he said. "Might run the well dry." And then, with that startling little revelation, he went on with his merry business, leaving Blaze staring at the edge of a 1/4 acre of crops and wondering just how she was going to keep it all wet enough for the seeds to germinate. Aside from the brief visit by Thunderbird, the sun had been burning down on them every day, all day, and as far as she'd heard, there was no sign of rain. This, she realized, was the first of her mistakes in the planning stage of her little farm in the woods. Back in Anchorage, hooked into the city main, she'd never even considered that someone could run out of water. And as the scorchingly hot, sunny days went on, and the moist, fluffy earth she'd exposed began to dry up into dust, water quickly became Blaze's primary focus in life. She would use the hose until the grinding sound from the pump told her she'd run out of water. Then she'd started dragging it up from the lake. Totally illegal, she knew, but she was desperate now. She'd poured thousands into seeds, and she needed those plants to help feed guests, because she'd never calculated on having to buy potatoes at the grocery store when it came time to feed fishermen. And yet, as many trips up the hill she made with water buckets, wasting fuel and time painstakingly pouring gallon after gallon into the parched soil, and yet, as many trips up the hill she made with water buckets, wasting fuel and time painstakingly pouring gallon after gallon into the parched soil, most of her fields simply didn't sprout. "You know," Jack said one day, having stopped in his daily tasks to watch her for a minute as she moved along the rows, hunched over, 5-gallon bucket in hand, "you might as well give up on the field and save what you can. It's late June." He jabbed a thumb at the sky. "It ain't cooperating with you." Indeed, with all the time she was putting into the field, her garden was bone dry, and most of the tiny seedlings had shriveled. Interior Alaska, gotta love it. Blaze dropped the bucket and slumped to her ass in a row, staring in despair at several weeks of wasted effort, and hundreds of dollars of rare heirloom seeds that would never sprout. "Hey, at least you tried, right?" Jack said. By the commiserating look on his face, that seemed to be his way of trying not to be an asshole. At least he was still trying. Maybe livestock would be a better idea. Blaze lowered her head between her knees, shaking it in despair. "Part of the reason I needed the crops was to feed the livestock. If oats won't grow, we can't really have chickens without barging in several tons of grain at 30 cents a pound." Jack grunted. "Well, you kinda got a point there." He grunted, then scratched his nose, leaving a grease smear. The whole garden was suffering from a lack of water, and no matter how many gallons she emptied onto the soil, walking through the rows like... The whole garden was suffering from lack of water, and no matter how many gallons she emptied onto the soil, walking through the rows was like padding through a desert, leaving 2-inch-deep footprints in the powdered dust. Her eyes caught on the scraggly little mango tree that Jack had insisted on planting at the end of one bed. Then she gave a depressed laugh. "I don't think I'm as cut out for this as I thought I was." Jack gave her an odd look. "Well, honey," he admitted reluctantly, "I did kinda think you'd do a bit better than this." "Oh, great," Blaze thought, humiliated. He sounded like a disappointed parent. She flopped backwards into the non-germinating row to stare at the sun as it made its way across the deep blue sky. She supposed it wasn't the end of the world. She'd have to buy groceries at Costco, big deal. Everyone in the bush did that. At least the air was clean, and she didn't have to deal with traffic. She could hear Jack shrug when he said, "But I could have just been wrong about you from the start. And hell, if it was easy, more people would have done it." He turned to wander back off to one of his projects. "Wait!" Blaze twitched and lifted her head to peer at him. "Wrong about me how?" Jack stopped, and she could have sworn he flinched. "Oh, come on!" Blaze cried in despair. "What did I do wrong? Not enough work ethic to be a farmer? Should I have been out here 16 hours a day instead of 14? Planted at the wrong time of the day? The moon wasn't right? Too tall? Too much distance between me and the seeds? Just tell me now so I can go inside and die." Jack turned to face her, slowly, his face a mixture of reluctance and unhappiness. Well, I thought I'd pegged you, but stuff just ain't adding up, so, yeah. Sorry I got your hopes up." He gestured at the withered rose. "But I'll still build you a barn if you want." "What's not adding up?" Blaze demanded, sitting up onto her elbows to get a better look at him. Jack seemed to want to say something, then just shook his head. "You're just a rich brat from the city with some expensive perfume or something. I hear they add hormones to that stuff nowadays." He shrugged. "Probably what got me." Remembering the goosebumps that had climbed up his arm when she reached out to shake his hand, Blaze said, "Hold on a sec. I don't wear perfume, I told you that." Then she frowned. "And what's that got to do with my garden?" "Probably nothing," Jack said, shrugging his big shoulders. "Felt like maybe you carried something special with you, but it was probably just wishful thinking." Blaze bit her lip, thinking of the feather neatly stashed between the rafters. "And this special you felt, it had to do with growing things?" Jack laughed. "Sweetie, you have no idea." "What, like fairy dust or something?" she growled. She picked up a handful of powdered earth and dropped it pointedly, letting him see it puff and blow away. Giving her an irritated look, he wiped sweat off his brow, then glanced up at the sun. "Okay, look. While you're out here taking a dirt nap, I really gotta get back to work on the chainsaw. The 40-year-old piece of shit snapped its cord again." Conversation over. He turned and wandered back towards the shop. "He thinks the feather would help." Blaze turned her head, looked at the desiccated rose, watched a lone ant crawl across the desert that was her garden, then rolled her head to look up at the sun again. Drier than Texas for months. The rains that make the Yentna flood its banks and take boats, gear, and even houses with it. Oh wait, then rains. Then rains that make the Yentna flood its banks and take boats, gear, and even houses with it. What the hell had she been thinking? Blaze pushed herself out of the dirt, struggled to her feet, and, without even bothering to dust herself off, strode towards the back door of the lodge. She passed Jack as she went, her longer stride carrying her across the backyard in ground-eating steps that quickly left him behind. "Hey now!" Jack called after her. "You weren't about to go do something stupid, are you?" Blaze yanked the newly repaired back door of the lodge open. Blaze yanked the newly repaired back door of the lodge open, then slammed it shut behind her, entering the wonderfully cool basement. She took an immediate right, climbing the staircase into the kitchen. I said that weird. She took an immediate right, climbing the staircase into the kitchen, not even bothering to take off her muddy boots. She heard Jack crack the door behind her, then groan when she saw the clods of dirt she'd left caking the steps. The weasel was, she had discovered, almost OCD in his desire for cleanliness. "Oh, that's helpful!" he cried up the stairs at her, before slamming the door again and disappearing back into the shop. Blaze ignored him, trotting across the fancy carpet, right up the stairs to the third story, then storming up the ladder into the attic like an elephant in a china store. The ladder swayed. The ladder swayed beneath her in rickety complaint as Blaze yanked the layer of insulation off of her father's present, stuffed it under her arm, and jumped back down to the rug, leaving a double footprint where she landed. Ignoring it, she stomped back down the first set of stairs, through the kitchen, down the second set of stairs, and ripped open the basement door again. Sending it crashing into the jamb behind her, she stomped across the weathered floorboards of the back porch, jumped over the steps, and headed for the shop. Inside, Jack was bent over a side table, back to her, fiddling with a lump of unidentifiable clutter in front of him, country music radio blasting in his ear as he worked. He was tapping his foot on the cement floor of the shop, whistling in tune with the song, when Blaze slammed the metal box down on his workbench, scattering parts everywhere. The werevarian shrieked and dropped his screwdriver, stumbling backwards, eyes going slitty on her. "Tell me what that is," Blaze snapped, pointing to the box. Jack stared at her like she was some sort of poisonous snake, and didn't even look at the box. "I have no idea what that is. Never seen it in my life." Looking irritated as his startlement faded, he growled, "You know you just made it so we gotta buy a new chainsaw, right? I'm not going hunting for all that shit." He gestured at the floor of the shop, which was even then scattered with tiny parts. "I don't care about the chainsaw," Blaze growled. "You said it was a 40-year-old piece of crap anyway." "It is," Jack said, "but that don't mean it don't still get the job done." "Tell me," Blaze gritted, "what that thing is." She jabbed her finger at the box. For the first time, Jack looked down at the metal case, but made no effort to touch it. He sniffed the air, then wrinkled his nose. Well, it ain't got a dead body in it if that's what you're worried about. Where'd you find it?" "That," Blaze said, "is what my father willed to me when he died." Jack seemed to relax. "Huh. All right," he said, reaching for it. "What'd the old fart leave you?" he asked as he opened the latch. "Some mummified monkey's peanut— Oh my shit!" He jumped backwards, hitting the far wall of the shop, making tools rattle off of their hooks and clatter to the floor. His reaction left Blaze feeling both vindicated and utterly terrified she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. "So you know what it is?" she demanded, biting down her fear that he was about to rip her head off and use her neck like a popsicle stick. The werevarian tore his gaze from the feather and looked at her, his mouth hanging open. When he offered up nothing else, Blaze urged, "You do know, right?" The werevarian swallowed, glanced at the doors of the shop, then returned his eyes to the feather and swallowed again. Very carefully, he said, "Honey, you said your father is dead?" Blaze squinted at him. "I put flowers on his casket." "But he's dead?" Jack demanded. "You're sure?" She remembered seeing her father's dead body, stretched out in a nice black suit. A few days later, she'd been called into the lawyer's office and gotten that sweet little story of the poor abandoned babe in the woods and how, oh, by the way, you're adopted and that's why you were always ugly. Her face hardening, she said, "I kissed his cheek and cried over his corpse and put myself in the hospital again." Jack blinked at her, looking a little surprised. "Oh." A tiny knot formed in his forehead. "So that wasn't his feather?" "Of course it was," Blaze said. "But he's dead?" Jack demanded. "Well, that's a stupid question," Blaze snapped. "Of course he's dead. What the hell does that have to do with anything?" Jack seemed to be having some sort of aneurysm. "So your dad, where did he get it?" "How the hell should I know?" Blaze demanded. "He collected old weird shit all the time. Had a whole basement full of junk when he died. What is it?" Jack was still pressed up against the far wall, like he thought the feather was going to bite him. Just really special, that's what." "So that's what you were feeling when I showed up?" Blaze demanded. "And don't try to lie. I saw you sniffing at me whenever you thought I wasn't looking." "Yeah," Jack said, almost in a pant. He was sweating, his face glinting in the shop light. "That's probably part of it." "Okay," Blaze said. "So what is it, and what are we going to do with it?" She cocked her head at him. "You said it could make stuff grow?" She backed up against the far wall. The werevarian made a nervous sound. You, mind taking out of the box there?" Let's do this. Yeah, let's just do it from here. From the top of that line. "You, Mind taking it out of the box then there, boss? I gotta get a good look at it. And those things don't, like the moon-kissed. Blaze narrowed her eyes at him. So basically, if it explodes, it'll turn me into a puddle of blood and gore while you safely watch from afar? Jack jerked to peer at her. You mean you ain't touched it yet? Of course not! Blaze cried, gesturing to the tendrils floating out of the case. Look at that thing, it looks alive! She glanced back to the feather and shuddered. Hell, the damn thing's basically whispering to me. Hell, the damn... What the... Oh, right. Okay. There we go. Hell, the damn thing's basically whispering to me. Even then, there was a nagging sensation that she should reach out, should pick it up, should do something with it. Jack's eyes suddenly narrowed with some sort of recognition. Whispering, huh? Blaze gave him a long, hard look, waiting for the Werverine to divulge some more information. When he didn't, she growled, Fine. I'll just go throw it in the river. She slapped the case shut and tucked it under her arm. No! Jack cried, leaping forward to catch the case in one hand, her shoulder in the other. Very carefully, he twisted her back around and made her set the case back on the workbench. All right, Toots, he said. That? He took a deep breath, scanning her solemnly as a man pronouncing an entire city's doom, looked up at her and said, Is a magic feather. Oh, for Christ's sakes! Blaze snapped, disgusted. She reached for the case again. In a flash, Jack grabbed her hand and held it against the workbench, pinned. Listen, honey, Jack said evenly. Maybe it is yours, but you ain't throwing that in a river. Wars have been fought over feathers like that. Wars, huh? Blaze asked, peering down at him. Yeah, Jack said, utterly serious. Wars. Blaze frowned. Jack said, utterly serious. Oh, that's Blaze frowned. Blaze frowned. That why Thunderbird looked at it? Jack froze, and she watched fur slide out the pores of his face. What? He dug it out of the freezer, Blaze said, shrugging. And you forced him to put it down? Jack cried in disbelief. He handed it to me, Blaze said, then walked away. Jack frowned. For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then, gruffly, he said, Okay, sweetheart. You got some sort of high-grade, rocket-propelled nuclear warhead I don't know about? She blinked at him. He waved a disgusted arm in the general direction of the forest. Then how the hell you get the glorified turkey to put the damn thing down? He demanded. I can think of a dozen ways he could have used it. Not that he needs any of them. Hell, probably would have braided it into... Probably would have braided it into his hair. Tongue twisters. Let's do this again. All right. Not that he needs any of them. Hell, probably would have braided it into his hair, the arrogant prick. That's why he visited then? Blaze demanded. Just to see it? Jack made a disgusted grunt. The nosy bastard probably wanted to know the source of the magic seeping into his neighbor's land. Blaze glanced down at the feather's case, impressed. So it is magic. It is, Jack said. We're gonna bury it, soon, before it attracts something more dangerous like the Fae. The ground will help mute the power a bit, spread it out more evenly, instead of letting it sink into the ley lines and hit the whole damn network. Okay, Blaze said. This magic feather, what's it do? Jack gave a nervous laugh and glanced at the door. Keep your voice down, sister. What's it do? She hissed. Can it help my plants? Can it help? He stared at her as if she'd asked one of the most retarded questions he'd ever heard. You really don't know what it is, do you? Would I be here asking you if I did? Blaze growled. Jack released her hand, giving her a nervous look, pushing the lid of the case open. You said you ain't picked it up? Would you? He gestured at her. Go ahead. It's not gonna bite. The pale, sweaty look on his face, however, told her that the werewolf was lying through his teeth. You pick it up first? Blaze growled. Jack's eyes widened at her, and he licked his lips, then glanced down at the feather. Instead of arguing, though, he tenderly reached down, and as if he were picking up spun glass, lifted the mass of red, orange, and gold filaments from its nest. It didn't turn him into a frog, as Blaze half expected. Here, he said, offering it to her. It's your garden. You're gonna need to work the magic. Hey now, Blaze said, holding up her palms warily. I don't know the first thing about but Jack grabbed her hand, flipped it over, palm up, and settled the feather into it. Instantly, the thing flared to life, the iridescent filaments suddenly blazing in glowy strands of red, orange, and gold. Jack! Blaze managed through clenched teeth as the feather lit up the room like a glow stick. What the fuck did you just do? But the werewolf was staring at her, a slack look on his face. Blaze gritted, biting out every word. Go off my hand! She could feel the feather crawling on her, caressing her skin like it was some sort of little gremlin made of goose down. When Jack didn't let go, and she could almost feel the tendrils digging into her skin, heating up her blood, making her heart suddenly start throbbing as embers began tracing their way through her veins, she screamed, No! Jack released her suddenly, stepping back so quickly that he tripped over a can of used oil and set it sloshing over the pristine floor of his shop. He landed on his ass nearby, staring up at her in perfect horror. Blaze quickly detached the thing from her palm and set it back into the box it had come in, then gave it a wide berth. She stood there, watching it for several moments before she said, It's still glowing. Yeah, Jack said. I'm pretty sure you just activated it. Oh, that's nice, Blaze said. Is that like, what, arming the detonator on a wad of C4? Jack said. He swallowed hard. How many kids did your parents have? Blaze made a bitter sound. My mom was found to have a protein deficiency that made her body abort. She had 3 miscarriages before the doctors pronounced her infertile. But she had you, Jack said. Blaze laughed bitterly. They found my Amazon ass in a fire pit in the woods. Even 4 months after her father's lawyer had so thoughtfully handed her the envelope describing her parents' misdeeds, it still hurt to talk about it. Took me home and raised me as their own. Used their money to fudge a few records, let me live my whole life thinking they were my real parents. Dad's lawyer dropped the bomb I was adopted when he gave me the feather. She glared at him, her words poison-tipped when she growled. Now that you've rubbed salt into an open wound, would you mind telling me what I'm dealing with? My dad obviously thought it was special. It's the only thing he gave me when he died, aside from the cash. Donated the rest to charity. Jack's hands were shaking, and he got to his feet blindly, the ass of his jeans having soaked up spilled oil. Instead of clearing up all the mysteries of life for her, however, he carefully crossed to the far wall again, then slowly slid down the edge of the workbench to a seating position, a good 12 feet away, watching her like she'd just grown slitted eyes and 16 rows of teeth. He said they found you in a fire pit? Jack asked in a quiet voice. Some sort of human sacrifice, they were guessing, Blaze said, shrugging. Whatever it was, my parents were pretty sure that the people who put me there weren't really the type of people who needed me back. For a long time, he said nothing, simply giving the case on the workbench a wary look. Finally, he said. "If I were you, I'd bury that feather. Plant an apple tree over it." "Apple trees don't grow in this climate zone," Blaze said automatically. In her planning stage, she had done thorough research into different types of foodstuffs that she could grow on her new property. She had already considered the option of having an orchard. But between the moose and the bitterly cold winters, apple trees didn't survive this far north. "That one will," Jack said. She hesitated, considering his expression warily. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Jack said, "that feather in there is about the equivalent of putting whatever you plant around it right on top of a Fey Lord's lifestone. Whatever you put around it, they'll probably still be fruiting in December." Blaze snorted. Then she realized he was completely serious. She said when he just raised a brow at her. "How do you know that?" Jack sighed. "'Cause I've seen nations fall over a feather like that. The Fae would kill to get their hands on it without even thinking twice. I can think of a dozen critters within an 80-mile radius who would slit their own brother's throat to have it in their possession. And a dragon?" He shuddered and cleared his throat. "Don't let a dragon know you've got it. Just don't," he grimaced. "Last time I saw a slaughter like that, they were in a clan war. I think 400 of them died before the survivors on both sides crawled away to lick their wounds." "For a feather?" Blaze cried. "That grows apples?" Jack licked his lips, seemed to debate. Then, almost reluctantly, he nodded his head toward the lake. "You know, Lake Ebony?" Blaze frowned. "Are you changing the subject again?" "You take that feather down to the shore and dip it in the water, and anyone who decides to go swimming in that lake for the next 10 years is going to come out healed of whatever ailed him. Fountain of Youth style." Blaze's mouth dropped open. "Oh. You can see how that might be trouble." She swallowed and nodded. "So yeah," Jack said. "Stick it in the ground. Give the wildlife around here a boost. And when people ask why you've got apple trees blooming in December, tell them you've got a really, really green thumb and you spend a small fortune on Miracle-Gro." Possibilities began to filter through Blaze's brain. Sitting across from her, Jack scowled. "I know what you're thinking," he began, a low warning in his tone. "You're thinking about using it." "I'm thinking what I can plant around it," Blaze snapped, bristling. "Just bugger off and let me concentrate a minute." She leaned her head back and considered. A good portion of her long-term plan relied on growing her own fruits and vegetables for her meals. Eventually, she wanted multiple greenhouses, gardens, and animal pastures. She frowned, looking back at him. "Would it help livestock?" Jack wrinkled his nose, looking agitated. "I thought we decided you'd bury it." "I didn't say anything about what I would do with my feather," Blaze retorted. Jack gave her a long, cold look. "You do anything stupid with it, and it's gonna disappear." She narrowed her eyes at him. "Define stupid. Anything other than burying it," he growled back. She met his gaze, challenging. "What would happen if I put it in their water trough?" The Werverine bristled. "No." "Why not?" she snapped. "It's mine." "Too many things could go wrong," Jack growled. "Like what?" The Werverine looked uncomfortable. His hackles started to bristle again. His hackles had started to bristle again, puffing out against his back before he seemed to slump in defeat. "Who am I kidding? You can do whatever you want with the damn thing." He gestured disgustedly at the yard. "Go put it on display for all I care." Blaze felt a bit of her guard drop with his admission. Curious now, she offered. "I told you I always wanted a nice farm." "Yeah," Jack said. "But in the water?" He scoffed. "Believe me, honey, you don't want it that nice." He gestured at the yard. "Put it in the ground. Pen your animals nearby, and anything within 10 acres is gonna grow twice as big and breed like rabbits. Blaze glanced at the glowing filaments. Blaze glanced back at the glowing filaments. Let's bury it where we're going to put the greenhouse. Jack was on his feet in an instant, hastily grabbing for a shovel nearby. You got it, Sweet Cheeks. Inwardly realizing that the Werverine was just a bit too eager to get the feather in the ground, but willing to do just about anything to get her plants to start growing, Blaze picked up the case and followed him. By the time she got to the garden, Jack had already started digging a pit at one edge. His eyes caught on the metal case in her arms, and he gave a nervous laugh. Then way too quickly fell into a one-sided chatter about all the different things he was going to have to do to the lodge before winter, to keep the place from freezing on her when the snows hit. And oh, by the way, he was going to be moving in with her downstairs. Blaze's mental reel came to a screeching halt, and she floundered, backtracking, replaying the Werverine's words in her head. "No, you aren't," she blurted, when she realized she had heard him correctly. "I'll have to go get my stuff," Jack continued, "so I can be moved in by the end of the night." "I said no," Blaze repeated for his clarification. Jack stopped digging long enough to give her a flat look. "Honey, about 90% of the world would spot you in a heartbeat to have what you've got in your hands right now." That got her heart pounding little waves of molten metal through her chest. Grunting, Jack started digging again. "Okay," Blaze said. "But if you're going to stay here, you're going to start teaching me how to make the stuff around here work." He glared at her over the hole. "I showed you how to run the bulldozer. That's one thing," she cried. "And then you took it from me because I wasn't doing it fast enough." "I'll take care of the rest," Jack said. "You don't need to worry about stuff like that. Just fiddle with your garden and make the place look pretty. I'll take care of the important stuff." "Just fiddle with your garden?" Blaze found herself having trouble speaking through her rising fury. "Contrary to your belief, Jack," Blaze growled, "I'm not a helpless bimbo. I want to learn that stuff, and I'm paying you to teach me. I will not be dependent on a man for the rest of my life. That's the whole self-sufficient thing. Got it?" He gave her an irritated look. "Every woman's got to depend on a guy sometime in her life. Right now, I'm that guy. Just deal with it, Toots." Narrowing her eyes at the surge of rage that made her want to wrap her fingers around his bovine neck, Blaze watched him dig for some time just to keep from screaming. "All right," she finally gritted. "I'm a businesswoman. You want to stay? We both have something the other wants. You know about engines and stuff. I know how to read." Jack lost his grip on the shovel and it went sailing across the yard with his last load of dirt. He stared at it for a long time, a flush creeping across his neck and face. "Must've got oil on my hands from the shop," he said. "I can teach you," Blaze insisted. "Fair trade." Did I record something on the phone track by mistake? I did. Fair trade. Okay, good. Fair trade. Jack twisted to glare at her, his green eyes dark. "I wasn't asking for your help, honey. I've been doing stuff just fine on my own." Still scowling at her, he went over to the shovel, yanked it off of the ground, and returned to the hole. Blaze shrugged. "I was offering to teach you, but I guess if you like being illiterate." She heard a deep-chested growl, but the Werverine said nothing and started to dig again. It was almost as if he were pretending she didn't exist. "Or maybe you're just a total chicken shit," Blaze sighed. "Been stuck in a rut so long, maybe you're too afraid to try." Jack slammed the shovel into the dirt and glared up at her. "We need to get that feather out of sight, boss, before the Fae get a whiff of it. Unless you've got something important to say. You're kind of breaking my train of thought, okay?" "By all means, carry on," Blaze said, gesturing at the hole with her free hand. Manual labor must really be an intense experience for you if I'm breaking your train of thought. Then after a moment, added, Chicken, I just want to get the feather out of sight without listening to your stupid... Jack tensed at her last. Then slowly, he turned to look at her, and she saw hair sprouting from his back, teeth sliding from between his lips. You, Jack growled, shovel handle gripped in a taloned fist, are about this close to getting a shovel through your brain pan. It was the feral sound, the rattling deep in his chest. Okay, chicken, Blaze said. She waved at the upturned earth. Go dig me a hole then. I'll dig your grave, Jack snarled. She heard a snap as the shovel handle splintered in his grip. Then the werevine was stepping forward, shoving his muzzle into her face. I didn't tell you so you could rub it in, goddammit! Even fully transformed, he was still only eye to eye with Blaze. Even fully transformed, he was still only eye to eye with Blaze. You're right, she slid it, she said. You're right, she said into his mouth full of fangs. I'll just go read a book. Leave you out here to your manual labor. She turned to go. Jack grabbed her by the back of her shirt and yanked her around so hard she would have fallen had his grip not been like iron, holding her in place. His glowing green eyes were fully slitted now, and blood was dripping from the inner rows of teeth. Blaze just peered back at him, long ago having learned he was harmless. You're gonna teach me, the werevine said, his breath scalding her face. Starting tonight. You asking or telling? Blaze said, utterly calm. Telling! Jack roared. Then I'm telling you, Blaze said. You're going to stop screwing around and start teaching me how to run this place. No more of this, you're just a city slicker who doesn't know any better crap. Stop blowing me off, start teaching me mechanicking, carpentry, plumbing, stuff like that. I'll teach you to read and write, and we'll call it a fair bargain. The werevine's unholy slitted green eyes scanned her eyes over its bared fangs, and for a moment, she thought he would simply bite off her face. Then, almost reluctantly, he seemed to shift back to his human form. Fine, he said, releasing her. He handed her the splintered end of the shovel. Your education starts now. Blaze frowned down at the broken spade. You're going to teach me to dig? Basics of manual labor 101, Jack said, crossing his big arms over his rippling chest, an amused smirk on his face. He nodded at the ground with his head. I'd say we're going to need something about 6 to 8 feet deep. Blaze balked. 8 feet? Yup, Jack said, gesturing to the dirt. Get started. He reached out and took the feather case from her. The shovels are in the shop. Blaze scowled down at him for several moments. Then, furious, she stomped back across the yard, yanked an uncrushed shovel from inside the shop, stalked back, and slammed the shovel into the dirt and pried up a clod of dirt. She tossed it aside, glaring at him. How was that, smartass? You could work on your technique, Jack suggested. Your arm quit... Your arm didn't quite get the loft I was looking for. Blaze narrowed her eyes at him and shoved the point of the shovel against his chest. You think this is funny? Jack glanced at the sun. I'm guessing it'll probably take you 5 to 6 hours. If you start now. He dropped the feathers box into the dirt at her feet, then turned and walked off toward the shop. Over his shoulder he called, Oh, and you're gonna want gloves to keep your soft city slicker hands from getting blisters! Blaze threw the shovel at him, but it fell humiliatingly short. Jack laughed without even turning. Scowling at his broad back, thinking about how much she'd like to see it peppered with birdshot, she returned her attention to the shovel. Snarling, she picked it up and started digging again. She ignored his warnings about blisters, she hadn't seen him use gloves, and put all of her concentration into prying out the next clod so she wasn't thinking about how much she wanted to pound the shovel into his fat head. She had gotten about 4 feet down in 2 hours when she heard another big engine from the heavy machinery lot start up, putter, then die. She chuckled to herself and kept digging. She heard him try a dozen more times, and each time it died, she cackled inwardly. "Some mechanic!" she shouted. She shouted into She shouted into one of the quiet moments in between cranks of the engine. If Jack heard, he didn't respond, but the pause in between starts was longer this time. When he finally turned the engine over again, it roared to life and fell into a low, healthy putter. Asshole, Blaze thought. The engine revved and she heard something big move forward, slowly coming out from behind the shed and the shop, making the trees themselves rattle. Blaze ignored him. Her hole was halfway done, and when it was finished and she'd stuffed the feather down there and covered it up, she was going to go back, sit down in front of the fire, and spend the rest of the day reading in front of him. The sound of the engine increased, however, until it grew so loud that Blaze had to look to make sure that it wasn't running her over. Her jaw dropped when she saw the enormous John Deere backhoe slide into position beside her. Over the roar of the engine, Jack shouted, "Manual labor 101! Never do any more work than you have to!" He then hit the hydraulics, and the bucket scooped out in a single load what Blaze had struggled to accomplish in almost 3 hours. As Blaze started to shake with fury, he dug out 4 more scoops, dropped them aside, then swung the bucket out of the way and switched off the engine. Hopping down, he cheerfully said, "All right, Toots, let's see that feather of yours." Blaze hurled a clod of dirt into his face, paused just long enough to watch it explode upon his brow, spun on her heel and stormed back to the lodge, so angry she couldn't even speak. She was dragging her duffels down the porch steps, heading toward the trailer of the four-wheeler, when Jack finished with the backhoe and returned to the lot. He came walking around the shop frowning at her. When he got close, he tossed the empty metal case onto the trailer in front of her. "Where you think you're going?" he growled. He still had a smear of dirt in the hairline of his right temple. "Away," Blaze said, dropping the last duffel onto the trailer. She reached into her pocket and yanked out her cell phone. She started dialing Bruce Rogers' charter service, but before she could punch out the full number, Jack snatched the phone from her and snapped it in half, then in quarters. Then he tossed it into the lawn. "Get back in the house," he growled, like he was talking to a hormonal teenager. Blaze stared at him, then stared at her broken phone. "That's assault," she finally snapped. Jack snorted and continued past her, stopping to pluck the key out of the four-wheeler's ignition on the way by. "You asshole!" Blaze screamed, watching him tuck it nonchalantly into his pocket. When he only laughed and disappeared inside the hastily patched back door, Blaze had to grab the trailer to steady her rage. She had never been so angry in her entire life, and had he not already broken her gun in half, she would have yanked it from her pack and shot him in the knee, then the foot, then the head. Instead, gunless, phoneless, Blaze slumped onto the trailer and stared at the broken remnants of her lifeline to the rest of civilization. Some time must have passed, because Jack came out onto the porch to lean against the doorway. Some time must have passed, because Jack came out onto the porch to lean against the doorway. "I boiled some eggs," he called, biting into one. "You hungry yet? Go suck on a revolver," Blaze snapped. She heard his chuckle as he ducked back into the lodge. She hated him. She hated every perfect inch of his sculpted body, wanted nothing more than to punch his pretty teeth in. Blaze looked down at her hand. It was huge for a woman. For a man of her size, though, it was tiny. Smaller than Jack's. The worst of both worlds, Blaze thought, disgusted. She closed her fingers, made a fist. The trailer rattled as Jack sat down beside her, his body almost touching hers. After a moment of silence, he set something heavy in her lap. Blaze looked down, saw the strange red wrench, and fought the urge to throw it to the ground. "That's a monkey wrench," he said. "It's used for tightening pipe." He set another one in her lap, this one silver. "That's a channel lock. Good for getting a grip on something to give it a good twist. See the head there? See how you can adjust it?" He pointed. Blaze's vision blurred as she looked down at the two tools. She quickly wiped an arm across her face and buried her cheeks in her shirt, feeling the first wave of exhaustion hit her like a hammer to the brain. "I will not cry," she told herself, breathing slow, deep breaths through the flannel, horrified at the idea of Jack seeing her in that state. Once she'd gotten herself under control again, she lowered her arm. "Just go fuck off, all right?" she whispered. But he settled a tiny knobby hammer. Onto her lap. "That's a ball-peen hammer, good for pounding out dents and little things like that. Good with an anvil." Oh, now my stomach is making gross noises. Okay. "That's a ball-peen hammer, good for pounding out dents and little things like that. Good with an anvil." He added another silvery tool onto the pile. "That's a socket wrench. See this here?" As she watched, he removed the round head, and, plucking a smaller one from the pile beside him, exchanged it. "You can change the sockets to fit any size nut or bolt. Good for getting into tight spaces where you don't have much room to maneuver." The wave of despair came back, burning her eyes like wet coals. Blaze sniffled, barely able to see the tools through her tears. "Damn it," she thought, as the soul-deep fatigue started to sink in. Aside from a brief cry for her father, she hadn't shed a tear in years. And here this son of a bitch had her weeping like a schoolgirl. And there was no helping it now. She felt it already reach that tipping point inside. In half an hour, she was either going to be in bed asleep or collapsed on the damn trailer, utterly helpless. Oblivious, Jack cleared the tools off her lap, then held up another. "Vice grips," he said, working the handles so that the toothed mouth worked like a hungry puppet. "Good for getting a hold on something and not letting go." When she didn't respond, he gently lowered it into her open palm and wrapped her fingers around it. "Adjustable? Little screw in the bottom raises or lowers the teeth. Go ahead and try." Blaze looked up from the tool, meeting his gaze. She felt her tears overflow from the motion of her head, making it run down her cheeks. He looked up at her, his green eyes wide, his mouth open. He seemed caught by her stare for several moments before he cleared his throat embarrassedly and looked back at the little stack of tools he'd lowered to the trailer beside him. "There's more," he said, running his big hands over the pile beside him. "I'll give you a few more each day." He was silent for a long minute. Then, "I really am an asshole, aren't I?" Blaze wiped her face again and looked away. Her gaze fell on the bulldozer, still parked where she'd left it, 40 feet into her new pasture. She'd abandoned that project around the same time she realized the sun had wrested her dreams away from her. "Blaze," Jack said softly. "Blaze," Jack said softly. When she couldn't find the words to answer him, he swallowed hard. "I'm trying. I really am. Every night, I think about it before I go to bed. I still got till next June. I'll figure it out." She set the vice grips onto the trailer beside him and got to her feet. "I have to go to bed now," she whispered. "I'll see you in the morning, Jack." She didn't wait for his response. She crossed the yard, went inside, got undressed, and slipped into bed even as she felt herself slide into another coma. Wow, alright, my goal was to get a 300-minute long file, and we are at 298. We have met quota for the day, I'm going to say. Chat, let's see how we are doing. Well, we have made it a long and merry way into the book, and I'm enjoying the hell out of it, so I hope all of you are as well. And thank you very much. Oh, thank you, Scar. Yeah, I mean, it's riveting writing. Makes it, a ton of fun to perform writing that good, so thank you for entrusting your words to me. We shall continue next week. I'm planning to do... Oh, thank you, Terry. I could read this for hours. I'm happy to know that you could listen. I'm planning on doing at least a couple of these a week. And then after the cold reads, or after I get through the amount left to do for the cold reads, I'll do it on the Discord stream, which is linked in the description. So you can check us out there. Any of the Sound Booth Theater narrators have rooms in the Sound Booth Theater Discord, which again is linked down below. So if you ever see any of us in there, stop by and say hi. We love talking to people. So, yes. So that will bring us to a lovely cliffhanger for the evening. What a good emotional cliffhanger to end on. Couldn't have planned that better. And I shall see you all at the latest on Tuesday. If I can get another Discord read-in before then, I will, but at the latest, you will see me again for an evening Tuesday read. Yeah, part 1 is also there. Yeah, cold reads are going to start going up on the Sound Booth Theater YouTube a lot, so my cold read 2 days ago that Sarah has mentioned is there, if you guys want to check that out. And there's no time skip that's happened between this and that. If I do a Discord read between a cold read and the next one, there may be a little bit, you may miss a little bit of the story because the Discord reads aren't recorded. But so far, so good. But so far, if you listen to the cold reads that are there, there will not be a time jump. There's just going to be me and the story and all of the mistakes you get to laugh at me while I make. So, all right, everybody. Have a good night. Lovely to have you here. Thanks for the company.